Time's short, so we'll call to order Senate Education. And Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Buck, Senator Oñate, Senator Flores,
Present.
Senator Hammond, Senator Neal, Senator Titus, Chair Lang.
Here. And if everyone could make sure that you've silenced your cell phones, we have 3 bill hearings today and a work session. I just want to give you fair warning because we're starting so late. If we do the bill hearings and we don't have enough time for the work session, we're going to roll the work session to Wednesday. It's a little more complicated because Senator Donate is presenting in HHS right now 2 bills, and then I have to go and present the 3rd bill in HHS. So we're just going to try and juggle all that and make it happen so that we have a good, productive meeting today. And with that, in Senate Education, we want to recognize the contributions of Senator Hammond. You know, he is termed out after this session, and so we're going to ask you to chair this meeting today.
That's what
Can you also do that? Do you want him to do roll? We did roll. We did. Okay. Sorry. So this is the order you're going to go, okay? And Senator Flores will be here to help you if I have to leave.
Madam Chair, if you might, I want to fix it.
Of course.
Started the meeting, so we'll go ahead. I think we're going to open up with Assembly Bill 282. So if we can get Assemblyman Summers Armstrong. And whenever you are ready, we are ready to listen. And before we begin, thank you, Madam Chair, for this privilege.
You're welcome.
Did not need to do that. Of course, I really do appreciate it, but this is awesome, and I've been nothing but, it's been a pleasure being in this committee with you anyway, and this is just a reminder of how we work here in the Assembly, or I'm sorry, how we work here in the Education in the Senate, and now we're ready for an Assembly bill.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, Senator Lang, Chair now, Senator Hammond. We are very happy to be here today to present to you Assembly Bill 282. Just a small point of privilege. Congratulations, sir, for all your years of service. This is a tough environment for anybody, and for you to have lasted this long doing good work for your community is a wonderful thing, and I'm sure that they are grateful. I'm just hurt that you beat the snot out of us in basketball, and I'm still a little salty about that, but your skills were like fire, and I was quite impressed. So jumping straight into Assembly Bill 282, we'd like to use a little bit of our time to share a video with you. Please.
My name is Abby Nyberg. I am a teacher here in Washoe County. I'm 23 years old, and I live and work in Sparks, Nevada.
My name is Jennifer DeLongchamps, and I am 50 years old. I work at Catherine Dunn Elementary School as a second grade teacher, and I live in northern Nevada.
I was a substitute teacher from March of 2021 to, I guess, technically May of 2022 or something like that. I can't remember my exact stop date, but basically I subbed all the way through college.
In 2012, in January, I got a long-term position actually here at Catherine Dunn, where I did special ed for K through 3rd. So I did small groups, whatever duty was responsible for that teacher. The following year, that teacher decided not to return. So I actually took an IEP class and how to write them, and I did all the responsibilities of a teacher with special ed training.
There were teachers leaving all the time. I remember some days there would be upwards of like 100 postings for like over like a 1 or 2 day period on ASAP, which is the app that we all use for assigning subs.
It was a full-time position for me, for a job for my family.
If you're a long-term sub, you're doing the work of a teacher, and you're likely only getting paid about $100 a day, sometimes less.
As a substitute teacher, if the kids aren't in school, you're not being paid. So like for the month of December, when at the time they had 3 weeks off, I was only paid for 2 weeks. I couldn't live on that, let alone pay for insurance during that time.
If you don't have another job as a sub, you're not making a livable income.
There are no benefits. You're like a contractor of sorts, I guess. And so, they really only up your pay after you've worked for 120 days.
I got lucky in that for most of it, I was on my parents' plan. Because I was still in college, and so I still qualified to be under them. And then the last year I got health insurance under the Affordable Care Act. Even just like the illnesses that you're exposed to outside of the accidents, because accidents happen, but that kind of stuff, it's so crazy to think about like not having insurance and something like that comes up.
Any type of benefit would have been appreciated. Accruing some sick time, just being able to survive that time that kids aren't in school.
I think that those people that are in our classrooms every single day, whether that's at one school site or they are rotating to other school sites, if you are on the calendar for 15 days a month or something like that, you should be getting benefits.
Anything, I think, would be better than what they have now.
Thank you for listening, and you can see by the video that this is a critical issue throughout our state, even more so in Southern Nevada. And so we're going to jump right into it, and I have with me Attar Hesabullah, attorney at law. He is the executive director of the ACLU of Nevada.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. For the record, Attar Hesabullah, first name spelled Athar, last name spelled Haseebullah. I serve as the Executive Director for the American Civil Liberties Union of Nevada. Happy to walk you through this bill, but I also want to say and take a point of privilege as well while I have the mic, and thank you, Senator Hammond, for your years of service. You are my senator. We've had many conversations over the years, and I've expressed quite openly to everyone that of all the challenges we've faced in the building, for me as a constituent, knowing I have access to my senator who's always willing to take a call, take a meeting, and have a substantive conversation about policy has really meant a lot, regardless of whether or not there was always agreement on a specific issue. So I very much appreciate that, and thank you for your years of service, sir. With respect to the actual bill in and of itself, Assembly Bill 282 is rather simple. What it does is it guarantees a subsidy for a long-term substitute educator to purchase health insurance through the exchange or through another means upon furnishing proof of such. In the Assembly, we actually had a couple different provisions that came forward. It would have included a dependent portion that was stricken because it didn't necessarily match up with existing collective bargaining. But the other thing that it did was it somewhat modified it from long-term substitute educator to full-time substitute educator in terms of the construction, regardless of what the language is that ends up being utilized, and now we're using the word full-time. What this bill would in effect do would be to require school districts to provide a $450 per month subsidy to someone who meets an eligibility definition for working full-time. Why does this become important? Well, we constantly talk about a teacher pipeline shortage. And more often than not, we're seeing that those shortages are not being addressed or filled. But something that's been neglected throughout that entire portion of conversation is we also have a substitute teacher shortage. And we're running into more and more scenarios where the number of long-term substitute educators is not shrinking. What we've attempted to do through this bill is first and foremost define what it means to be a full-time substitute educator here. That definition has been that you've worked 30 consecutive teaching days within a school year, that you continue to work with a 70% threshold for the remainder of the school year for purposes of eligibility here, that you do not break and not teach for 45 days. So if you miss time within that, you don't work for 45 days, it falls by the wayside. And then upon reaching that threshold, you'd be eligible to purchase health insurance through the exchange, but the district would be required to provide you with a $450 subsidy to do so. Where did the numbers come from here? First and foremost, 30 days initially, it was our position that it could be a lower threshold to satisfy that definition. We spoke to the business community, we spoke to stakeholders, and it seemed that 30 days was in line with market. These are 30 available teaching days that are effectively not stripped away from someone's ability to continue to work to be able to earn this benefit. And upon that occurring, the district again would be required to furnish you with $450 per month as a subsidy, specifically to purchase health insurance. This is not for general purposes. This is because these long-term substitute educators or full-time substitute educators do not have any health insurance or benefits right now. They're not entitled to anything. And in fact, certain policies and procedures that have been set forth by school districts throughout the state actually preclude districts from offering benefits. Now today you'll hear a couple things. You're going to hear from a couple school districts that are in opposition to this bill, and there are going to be two arguments. As a former government lobbyist, I'm very familiar with both arguments. The first is that it's an unfunded mandate. It is not. And let me walk you through the specifics of why it's not an unfunded mandate. This legislature, you all, continue to fund education as if these classrooms are being filled with actual full-time licensed educators. That's in fact not happening. So what is happening is every full-time substitute educator that's put into a classroom ends up being an accrued savings versus what the actual budget is for a school district. Why does that matter? If you have a substitute educator who's capped at $120 a day, and their average ends up being under $25,000 a year and no benefits, and then you have a licensed educator who's making double that and receives benefit, for every substitute educator that falls within this parameter that's filling that seat in a classroom, a school district is saving upwards of $35,000 to $40,000. And how many teachers does this end up being? Well, unfortunately, when we reached out to every school district, besides Nye County, shout out to Nye County, that's the only time I'll ever say this on the record in my position, but I will try. We got an actual answer back from that district and gave us the exact number. And it was the same for some of the other districts after we probed. We thought it was going to be a small amount. In Clark County, CCSD alone, we recognize this actually exceeded 700 educators that met this definition, and over 130 in Washoe County. Why does this end up becoming a challenge? Why are we here today? Substitute teachers don't have a bargaining unit, and majority of subs are burned out by the time that they're able to continue, so they don't end up getting benefits. They don't end up staying long enough to be able to be in the classroom because, quite frankly, they're not treated with any dignity. Right now, these educators are oftentimes falling on Nevada Medicaid, so the state ends up covering the cost of this, or they're forced into ambulatory care because they don't end up having any sort of health insurance benefit. As a result, the state's going to end up incurring the cost either way. So from our vantage point, from a financial standpoint, this ends up being a savings either way for the state, but really it should be incumbent on districts to do this because these are their employees. They're simply not treating them that way, despite the fact that they're working 70% of the available days, despite the fact that they're filling the gap, despite the fact that if they quit, these schools are going to end up closing. We're not talking about a small, minuscule number here. You'll hear from CCSD, which will say that they have a policy in place, which we ended up receiving. We included that as an exhibit in the appendix alongside the other records that we have. That says if you work as a substitute educator for a year, they'll measure the dates, and then your second year, they may give you benefits. What other employer has a setting where you need to work for a full year before you get health insurance benefits? This doesn't actually require the district to furnish the health insurance. Again, it's a subsidy. So this goes into the private market. It doesn't impact bargaining for any other teachers union, any other bargaining unit that might be in place. But what it does is it allows these individuals to receive some semblance of dignity. And if they get sick while they're in their line of work, they don't have to worry about losing whatever little funds they do have available. So realistically, from our vantage point, this is a pro-business bill because it'll end up propelling that market forward. It is a pro-educator bill because it may help reduce this shortage that we're running into and help put out some of this fire. And also, it's a common sense bill that should have already been in place. There are other districts nationwide that are affording their educators, that are substitute educators, health insurance. I recognize this is not a perfect solution, right? There might be other challenges that come up. This isn't singularly going to solve for our issues, but it does go a long way in making sure that public health is addressed through this mechanism, and also that these educators receive some level of support for the work that they're putting in. Whether or not there's an exception in place because they're viewed as subs and not educators ignores the reality that this applies to a subset of that pool who are in these classrooms, again, 30 consecutive days and 70% of the days thereafter, and shifts the burden to districts beyond the state to be able to give them the subsidy once proof is provided. Now, if somebody does not provide proof of health insurance purchase, they don't get subsidy. And over the summer, this is an issue that comes up because we run into challenges. What happens over the summer if you're paid per day? They also don't get it there. We talked to several subs. While they'd like it to continue through the summer, they oftentimes take on gig work over the summer or other lines of work over the summer, so they're able to potentially put in through other means. But it does create the ability at some level to have these benefits in place. You know, there's been a lot of conversations these last 2 to 4 years about guaranteeing health insurance coverage for all Nevadans. We're not even guaranteeing coverage for people who are in classrooms teaching every day. And from our vantage point, we should really start there. With that, I'm happy to answer any technical questions that come up. But again, I can't behoove this committee anymore. This is a real concern. These educators are not going to end up lasting if they're not receiving any level of support. And any arguments that this is an unfunded mandate simply ignore the reality that you're saving $30,000 to $40,000 per long-term sub that falls under this criteria and not giving them any benefits alongside that.
Very well. Before we move on, I just wanted to make sure I didn't pass up the opportunity to say thank you for your compliments. It means a lot. I think we live today in a hypercritical world, and we're trying to see the worst in people. But I think that Atar, you and I have always had a chance to try and talk through things. I think there's got to be more of that, and try to find the good in people. And I appreciate that. And thank you for your kind words, Assemblywoman. Is there anybody else who's a part of your presentation today?
Chandra Summers Armstrong for the record. No, it's just Atara and I. I think that we can work together to answer any questions you all may have.
Well, then I'll go ahead and open it up to the committee to see if there's any questions. As always, I like to start on my right. We'll start all the way down to the far right to Senator Titus, and then we'll go to Senator Neal, and then over to Senator Buck.
So thank you, Chair, for the day. I thank you for being here. I appreciate what you're trying to accomplish, but some of the technical questions I have. So if they buy this insurance, many insurance companies have limited enrollment periods. How does this apply then if they're a substitute for 30 days, middle of January, or say just in April? Does that affect the open enrollment plans?
For the record, Atar Hasibullah, ACLU of Nevada, it should not. So when we connected with respect to purchasing through the exchange, those same challenges didn't seem to exist. In fact, there seemed to be some level of enthusiasm for getting more individuals covered. There's also the ability, again, to purchase separately outside of that, but it did not seem to be an issue. The one challenge that we do run into that seems to be a minor conundrum, as I mentioned, was with respect to continuous coverage, right? And what happens, again, potentially over the summer if you end up qualifying in advance of that. But again, the folks we spoke to, they were content with knowing that there was some level of benefits in place to begin with, and then we can see from there if we end up having to come back and modify that. One of the big challenges is in terms of how the subsidy would actually be cut or dispersed. And part of the reason for that is because, as mentioned, these educators are paid based on their work per day. So it's not actually coming in a consistent 2-week fashion that's rolling over throughout the period of the year. Nonetheless, the actual provisions in place that will allow for something secondary in terms of a secondary period of employment over the summer, either through a school district or through some other means, would still allow for them to receive coverage for the portion of time when they're engaged in that employment, and then continue to pay while that period is there. Now, you might also have some teachers who simply decline. And that's also fine because it's limited to health insurance purchases with proof of that furnished.
Follow up, Mr. Chair, for the day?
Yes, please.
So there's also something already in place on the federal level. It's called COBRA. So you can purchase, like those 3 months people are unemployed, you purchase your insurance. That's already existing. Would this be different than that?
For the record, Atar Hasibullah, ACLU of Nevada, it would be different, Senator, and the reason why is because COBRA generally ends up applying when employment ceases. It also goes specifically to the actual type of coverage that's given. So generally the way that COBRA would work is that if you're employed, you're a full-time employee, you're receiving health insurance through your employer, and what would happen is when there's a cessation of that employment, you'd be able to pay out of pocket to continue that coverage. This would be a little bit different in that the coverage to begin with is not covered by the employer. The coverage that comes in is purchased privately through that substitute educator. It would be their ability to go forward and move and purchase on their own that policy. The distinction would become it's subsidized. So this private subsidy that ends up coming in allows them to purchase privately. So COBRA would therefore be inapplicable when that ends up occurring.
So a lot of these are federal programs and federal mandates, the COBRA laws and some of these, and much of our insurance regulation have a federal component. Does this in any way require any federal or waivers?
For the record, Atar Hasibullah, no, this does not modify or impact COBRA at all in any capacity because, again, the coverage is not what's being provided. A subsidy is being required to be provided. Now, I'll tell you, if we were to go backwards, and this would have been a requirement for the districts to actually provide health insurance coverage, and that employment would have ceased or been viewed as having ceased over the summer, it may have implicated COBRA. It's part of the reason why we went the private subsidy route instead of going the route of having the district be guaranteed to provide health insurance coverage. Again, there's gaps there, but what we tried to do through AB 282 was limit these gaps to the degree we could, and we didn't let perfect become the enemy of good or vice versa here. We wanted to get something in place that was tangible without implicating COBRA or other provisions that specifically deal with employment benefits, and then run into an issue 6 months later where it becomes a distraction. It's part of the reason why we also move forward with a 30-day provision and a 70% threshold thereafter and a 45-day you must remain employed and continue to teach during that time period, because what we did not want to do was provide any excuse for why our long-term subs, our full-term subs, are not getting any level of support to be able to purchase these plans and stay safe and healthy.
All right, thank you for the questions,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Neal.
Thank you, Chair for the day. So I get it. I understand the 30-day, but what I'm trying to figure out is how many substitutes are in CCSD?
I can give you the exact number. I believe it's 735 that meet this definition. There's well over 1,000 that end up meeting a broader definition. So what we attempted to do when we ended up actually speaking to the districts as a whole was to get public records requests to figure out who met this threshold. Initially, we were provided with a series of Excel sheets, which we attempted to go through and deduce. So we ended up narrowing our records requests back. We ended up receiving that information back, and I'm happy to provide you with the exact numbers if that's preferred as well. We have them broken down by district, but in Clark County, 775 subs would meet this definition. In Washoe County, 132. Nye County, 28. Douglas County, 12. Carson City, 32. They all meet the definition, again, of that 30-day minimum threshold.
Okay, and so the fiscal note you calculated, because I saw Elko's fiscal note, which was roughly $2 million over the biennium. So you have 775 subs who would get a $450 subsidy.
For the record, Atar Hasibullah, Senator Neal, that would be correct. They would receive the subsidy, and our contention is that the fiscal notes are fake. And the reason why we're saying they're fake is because these are accrued savings and budgeted for expenses by the districts. So you can add up a fiscal note and say this is what it's costing a district, but really when you're saving $30,000+ because this money has been dispersed to these school districts and they are not filling these positions with licensed educators full time, they are saving per long-term sub. That's part of the story that's not being mentioned. It actually ends up being a story where it's almost bait and switch. If you have a full-time educator in these classrooms, this provision won't apply. If you don't have any subs and you don't have any long-term subs, your fiscal note becomes zero. So how can we reconcile the fact that that ends up being zero with the fact that these numbers are what they are? It does not add up. So that's why I'm saying the fiscal notes, they can offer them, they can say it's an unfunded mandate, but it is not truthful.
So, okay. Clearly you're passionate on this topic. However, there is a reconciliation because the vacancy savings
I mean, we dealt with it in 2015, that you weren't supposed to use your vacancy savings and then fill it with a long-term sub or spread your money so that it go to another district. Now we're having this issue around carryover dollars at the local precinct. So the discussion is actually happening at the local precinct level, and the savings, you can find that in their carryover dollars. So then how do you reconcile, teacher comes in within 30 days, they're within their 30 days, because you also have a 45-day, it looks like a catch-all or fallback period in here. So let's say teacher is hired day 28, full-time, because a sub is not guaranteed to keep an assignment, period. So you're there as long as the vacancy exists, whether or not you're there as a daily, couple of weeks, or if you go in and you initially fill a long-term sub position, meaning that you are now in sub-services, and sub-services has said, this is the long-term position we're expecting you to fill. So then how do you reconcile the person who then says, well, I was looking forward to this day 29 or day 30, and now I can't trigger this health insurance, but I was expecting it? Because you can't tie the hands of the district not to put a teacher in. We've also passed legislation that's contrary to that position.
Thank you, Senator Neal. Chandra Summers Armstrong for the record. So we know that a substitute teacher cannot be guaranteed a long-term assignment, but the catch-all in there, 30 consecutive days, doesn't mean that they have to be in one place. If that position ends at day 20, and there is still an availability within the district to go someplace else, it's just going to compound. It's 30 days consecutive work.
For the record, Atar Hasibullah, ACLU of Nevada. I'll also answer Senator Neal. Provision number 6 specifically addresses that as well, because what it does is it precludes a district from allowing that educator to work those available days, specifically for the purposes of precluding receipt of this benefit. Now, would there be a scenario where this is inapplicable? Potentially, we would view that as being great if this bill didn't need to exist, because that would mean we've met our licensed teacher threshold, and somehow overnight, for instance, in CCSD, they found 735 licensed educators that they gave benefits to. That would be wonderful. We're not there. We're not going anywhere near there. And so what ends up happening right now is that number's not shrinking. This number has not shrunk to the degree that anybody thought it would over years. And it's not a issue that's limited to Nevada schools. I want to be clear about that. This is a nationwide issue where we're running into teacher shortages everywhere. The difference is certain school districts across the country have already started the process of giving these subs benefits so that they can retain them and ultimately get them in a portal and pipeline to where they may become licensed educators, versus our state, where they're turning over and they're leaving the profession and never coming back.
Thank you for that follow-up.
Please.
So in sub 6, I read that, but it's an or statement. And the or statement says reassign a person to other duties within a school. So how can you prevent that from happening? Because you're a long-term sub, someone takes you out of the classroom and then decides they want to use you in a different way. You're now saying that in the or statement that they cannot do that. How can you tie their hands that way?
For the record, Atar Hasibullah, ACLU of Nevada, it's only an or statement to the extent letter C is not included, but letter C is conjunctive with A and B, and letter C says specifically to prevent a person from qualifying for the subsidy provided pursuant to this section. So because of that limitation that's put in place, that would actually be the baseline preclusionary factor. So if it falls within A or B there, again, they're able to do that for whatever the needs are. What they're not able to do is come in and say, we want to save more money, so 29 days in, you're dismissed. I'm not saying that would ever happen in any school district, but I'm also not saying it wouldn't. And so the ability there would be to maintain that portion, to include that as a protection that's in place for an individual who's doing that, so that subsidy doesn't cut off. Again, we limited it. We could have used language like for a good cause, but we know what using good cause language for terminations would do, and we're not going to allow that to happen with respect to this bill because too many individuals are depending on it.
Okay, appreciate that comment. So what's the remedy if you say A happens, C is, allegation is I'm prevented, I was prevented from qualifying for the subsidy. What's their remedy? What's their action here?
For the record, Atar Hasibullah, I largely view it as, unfortunately, I'm their remedy.
So you
right?
want a
So
private right of action?
There will end up being a private right of action if that occurs, because it would be a law that's in place. The issue that we run into is the scenario becomes unlikely. But specifically, if a district decides to do that, it would be as if any other state action occurs, and there is no ability for an individual to have recourse there. If somebody works 29 days, and it's clear that that individual has been deprived of their right to continue to work simply so that a school district could continue to save money and not pay out benefits, they would have a private right to action pursuant to whatever employment claims exist, because it becomes contractual at this point as well. So they've had the portion of time that they've worked. They have relied on that. So there becomes almost an estoppel argument at that point. The goal, though, is not to open up the floodgates of litigation, because that wouldn't happen, right? So the point would be that the districts end up engaging in that way to maintain their workforce. And if they're able to maintain their workforce in that right, and they don't end up depriving anybody, and they act in accordance with the law, this would just mirror every other provision of law that exists, which would allow for those individuals to continue to work and not be put in a position where they're deprived of that. It would be, sorry, Senator.
No, I thought you still had an extra part of your sentence.
It would be incumbent on the districts to comply with the law. So the way to avoid action in that regard would be to allow these individuals to continue to work. If you're going to remove them for good cause, for whatever other ability you want to, do that. But you can't simply remove them for purposes of saving on a subsidy.
Okay, listen, I understand, Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong, that I get the policy and understand, but you're now creating a contract right for someone that is listed as a temporary employee. And I'm trying to figure out how you're creating that, because you're saying that this contract right exists as long as a vacancy savings is in place. And when that vacancy savings is no longer a part of the, I guess, circumstance of this employee, then what rights then accrue? Is that still a contract position? Because really the superseding piece is the vacancy. And the full-time licensed teacher who gets in that role, that supersedes the sub. So talk to me real life. Substitute comes in, how do they trigger contract law and then say, my contract was violated in a vacancy scenario?
For the record, Atar Hasibullah, ACLU of Nevada, in a vacancy scenario, Senator, what would ultimately end up happening is that, again, if we're speaking about real life and we're talking about 735 educators that are there, they're not filling this overnight. They're not filling it by next year, and they're not filling it in the next 2 years. That is the reality of the situation that we're faced with. If we have to be honest in that regard, it's simply not happened over the period of years. What would happen is if this number ends up reduced, they are not entitled to this benefit if the purpose, again, is letter C. So what ends up happening is, if the only way that there would be this right would be if the district is specifically precluding them from working to be able to obtain this benefit. If their goal is to be able, if they say they've come in and they've filled this vacancy, letter 6 is no longer applicable at that point, and the rest of the provisions wouldn't be either. The only time it would kick in is with respect to letter 6C, which is a catch-all, and that says that you can't preclude the ability of that individual to work specifically and explicitly only for the purpose of receiving that subsidy. So they filled up every spot, no longer applicable. But what's more likely to happen, and the reason why we included this language, is a district comes in and they say, we don't want to pay these benefits. It's been 29 days, so we're not going to continue to do it. So we'll let the person go, and we don't have to give cause in that regard. So realistically, that's where it comes in. But again, if we don't have any vacancies, it wouldn't be applicable, because at that point, there would only be the full-time portion in place. Only time that remedy or benefit would kick in terms of what a private right of action could look in is specifically if that ability to work is denied for the purposes of not issuing a benefit.
Can I ask one final question?
And then we'll switch over, because he's on the ropes right now, and I don't want to give him a reprieve
Surely
a little
he's
bit
not.
here.
So the final question that I have is that you want the way I'm hearing you state this, you want this subsidy to come out of the potential savings that's at the local school precinct per long-term, short-term that is at the school, correct?
For the record, Atara Hasibullah, yes, you're
Okay. So then in that scenario, if the savings is there, so do you want at the local school precinct level, when it comes down to budgeting by the principal, because that is who's doing it, do you want them to then set aside the potential long-term sub vacancies that they had the prior year and then create a bucket for the potential upcoming year? Because you have to plan for this activity, right? You have to withdraw that money or set it aside from your account. And let's say you're at an at-risk school that has such as, and I hate to say this school, but if you're at Matt Kelly where 50% are long-term, then passage of this bill, Matt Kelly principal then needs to set aside 50% for this potential $450 subsidy that should come out. Is it every 30 days? Is it 450 times 12 months, 9 months, 7 months? What is it?
For the record, Atara Hasibullah, ACLU of Nevada. Senator, with respect to that point, that would be our goal, but the way the language of the bill is actually drafted is it would be incumbent on the district to specify that. The reason why we say that is because the policy is applicable statewide. So when we end up in a place like Douglas County or Nye County, they're able to provide the parameters that are in place. If Clark County School District, which is obviously our fifth largest school district nationwide, comes back and they say, we want the parameters to come out this way, principals need to be able to budget for it in that manner, they can do it in that manner, right? So it gives some level of flexibility. It also gives flexibility with the way the dispersals happen, right? And the ability for staff to be able to check to see if the policy was actually purchased. What it doesn't allow is for the continuation of an individual to be in a classroom without any sort of benefits. So the prescription there is with respect to having that subsidy in place, and the parameters associated with its dispersal are largely left to individual districts to be able to decide what works best for them. What happens in Nye County and Douglas County is not going to be the same model that CCSD ends up absorbing in terms of actual implementation. And the reason why is you're dealing with a place that has 28 long-term subs versus 735, and that number again continues to pick up. So should there be a time period when they stop budgeting for it and they recognize they've filled their teacher vacancy number as a whole, this bill won't need to exist. The goal would be for this bill to never exist, but that's not the reality we face. We face the fact that we're coming back here year after year, and these numbers are only increasing, and people are getting sick in classrooms. They're ending up on Nevada Medicaid, and then they're coming to organizations like ours to ask what they can do because the place where they have been working is not giving them any sort of benefit.
I know that Senator Buck has a question as well, but Senator, is your question a follow-up to Senator Niels?
Yeah, something. Well, I'll make a comment and then a quick question. And thank you, Chair, for a day.
Yeah.
And we've had multiple bills come before this committee this very session where there's been a very common theme. Some of our teacher unions have expressed concern that and when I say we, that schools and school district would prefer to keep a substitute teacher versus a teacher in the classroom because there's an economic incentive, there's a saving there. We've been hearing a lot about that, and there's a whole host of bills there. And I'm not suggesting that I agree or disagree with that, I'm just saying I've heard that stated before me multiple times. And I think something that was alluded to, maybe not said exactly directly, on top of protecting the substitute teachers, which obviously are deserving, the more protections we're adding, the more we move in the direction of there is no longer an incentive to continue this model of substitute teacher versus teacher. Again, there would be a whole host of folk that would argue, no, that's not true. We would much rather have a teacher, but that they're not there. But if I've spoken with many teachers in some of our unions, and they'd make the argument the other way around. We've had instances where there are teachers in some areas, but we think that they're preferring a substitute teacher. But I just wanted to make the point that it's been kind of alluded to and echoed in this very committee multiple times now, the more protections we put on a substitute teacher, the more there is the less incentive that exists to want to continue down that path, right? So and if you have a comment to that, please get into that. I know Senator Neal hit it, and you've been talking about it a lot. But I mean, there is a reality that it's going to be very difficult for us to know if a substitute teacher under sub 6 or under category section 6 here, sub 6 in section 1, excuse me, that if they're just purposefully changing a sub, right? Because anything would work. You know what? We just didn't like the relationship, or something happened. I mean, it's going to be difficult for us to do that. But ultimately, in the grand scheme, we're going to have more substitute teachers protected. Because I agree with Senator Neal that that may continue to happen, right? They may hit at 27 or at 20 in a very sneaky way, get somebody else to go in there just to avoid that. I get that could happen. But at the end of the day, that scenario, although that could happen, I still agree that having more substitute teachers protected at the end of the day with that subsidy is the right objective. And I appreciate the tone. So if you wanted to add anything to that, please do. But it was probably more of a comment than anything else.
For the record, Atar Hasibullah, ACLU of Nevada. Senator Flores, I agree, and I also agree with Senator Neal on this point, that we run into challenges in terms of figuring out ultimately what's the best solution. And the amount of protections we have in place right now is nil. We're at none for these folks. So doing something like this, which again still pales in comparison to what's happening across the country in terms of how they're recruiting and stabilizing that model, it's at least a start to go someplace. Is it enough? Probably not. Would we have liked to have seen the dependent portion stay in? Yes. Would we want coverage throughout the summer? Yes. And a lower threshold? Also yes. That's not the reality of where we are right now, right? We looked at the numbers. We're looking at the aggregate state of where we're at overall as a society and as a climate. And what we've attempted to do here is carve out something that's narrow enough to be efficient. But to that same point, when we discuss the ability for these individuals to have protections, I'll reiterate, there is no bargaining unit for these folks. They don't have someone that's fighting for them. That's why the ACLU of Nevada is working with Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong to bring this piece forward. There is no voice for substitute educators here. They don't have the resources to be able to come to Carson City to push a bill. There is nobody that's able to go in their behalf and fight with school districts about pay parity. It would have been lovely for us to show up here and ask for a pay parity, a bill where they would have been within a specific percentage. And we all know how that bill would have likely ended up going. So we're here with a narrow bill to try to get these folks health insurance and move on from there.
Thank you, Senator Buck.
Thank you, Chair Hammond. I agree. I agree with you, and I think this body needs to look to our charter school innovation counterparts, because in most charter schools, substitute teachers get a contract, they get insurance, 11 days paid time off, salary paid over 12 months, a retention bonus, and if they're in a classroom situation, then they get incentive bonuses based on their SGP or student growth percentile and proficiency ratings. So I agree that this subset, I feel that they are our pipeline for filling and getting people into the teaching profession. But in the interim, when you're asking parents, can you substitute, and you get them their license, and then you're able to provide those benefits in a contract as a substitute teacher, you're able to provide those benefits. And so with that, I was just wondering, I don't agree with the subsidy. That's the piece that I don't think districts can be able to do. I mean, it's just so vague in that, are they going to be there for 30 days or not? If the districts would hire a pool of substitutes for their long-term needs, so if there's 700 long-term substitutes, you hire them, because I do agree with you, there is money in school budgets for this allocation. It's just, I don't agree with the way that you're going about the subsidy. So if you could address that, and then maybe if you could look at and see what charter schools do with, mind you, $1,500 less per student because they have to pay a building lease. So they're able to do all of this for substitute teachers with $1,500 less per student because they have to pay their building lease or their building bond payment. So if you could address the subsidy thing, if there's a way to not do that. I don't think that's the answer. That's too vague and it's too much paperwork.
For the record, Atara Sibulesio, U of Nevada, I appreciate the comments and the question, Senator Buck. A couple things I'd respond with. First, with respect to the actual subsidy portion and health insurance. We're dealing with larger districts here. So as you know, and you alluded to, and I'll touch the charter model specifically, we're not dealing with individual school sites making their own determination. We're dealing with massive districts in certain instances, and sometimes even smaller districts, still large districts that are not independently managed at each school site level. So when we're looking at uniform application of rules and what you can do as a larger employer versus a smaller employer, and I say this as somebody who's consulted for larger businesses and smaller business and government agencies, right? Worked in those settings. Each of these requires different parameters, different special needs that are in place. You can't treat a large business or a large organization or a gigantic entity like CCSD the same as we would an individual school site, right? And that's part of the thought process behind why some argue for smaller apparatuses in place. But that doesn't mean that's what's most effective, right? There's various opinions on that, and we're not here today to discuss that. What we are here to discuss is the fact that when we are looking at these larger entities and these districts specifically, the best way of doing this is through a subsidy. It's the least vague way of doing it. And the reason why I mention that is a couple reasons. First and foremost, if you attempt to actually require the purchase of health insurance or give your employees a benefit in that regard and say, hey, you've done it automatically, you don't have the same turnover rates. You may run into a scenario as well in terms of safeguarding against what could end up being waste of an individual not working beyond a specific period of time. The reason why we have the subsidy in place is because a district can in fact manage that. They're able to see and track the attendance of the actual employee when they come in. They're able to see how long they've worked for. They're able to see when the mechanism that's in place would require that they end up doing a purchase. They're able to track the actual purchase to make sure that it's not used in a general capacity for, let's say, any type of other support. And because of that, it actually safeguards against any government waste in that regard. We're also not supportive of government waste. We wouldn't want to be in a scenario where the point of the bill was to be able to use it for health insurance purchase, and that didn't happen. So when we're dealing with large-scale environments and you're dealing with the labor force as large as, let's say, CCSD, it'll have different needs. So while I respect and appreciate the point with respect to charters, it's apples and oranges when we come down to the overall size of the model and what they're able to purchase. You'd end up dealing, in fact, with something that's maybe, 1,000 times the size or more of an individual school site. And because of that, we have to have parameters in place. What it doesn't do is create a written contract. What it does do is create a statutory right. And that statutory right serves almost as if it's a contract because you know what to expect. You know that if you work this period of time, this is what you're going to be getting because these school districts can't go under this. If a school district decides to go above and beyond that, well, that's great, right? Like, my goal would be to eventually be out of business myself, where there are no more civil rights or civil liberties issues. Do we think that's going to happen? No. So that's why we're here today, to ask that that basic level of right be guaranteed. With respect to what the model is, if there are charters that want to engage and support in that effort and share, where they're purchasing their health insurance from, or maybe there's other deals that can come in, that becomes useful, right? But as it stands right now, without that baseline subsidy, they can't purchase the private health insurance. They can't get any health insurance. So when you're at $120 per day, it precludes you from being able to purchase anything, and it allows you only really to be on Nevada Medicaid.
But you absolutely could, because if I was going to put out a job application and take 500 long-term subs and put them in my support staff pool, because they're not actually licensed staff members yet, I could offer them benefits. And then it would provide an alternative for the part-timers, and they, of course, wouldn't get the benefit. So I absolutely think that you could do that. You just offer in the size of Clark County School District, you said 735 long-term subs. So put out 500 applications for those long-term subs and then pay them their benefit. Because I do agree with you on this point. They are filling a vacancy. They make about $27,000 a year, maybe. And they don't get any benefits in the district. And so it would benefit and it would bring a lot more to the pool if you were able to offer them a long-term contract with these benefits. Maybe not as what teachers get exactly, because I know that would step on some toes, but similar to that.
Senator Buck, I appreciate that point. And should they decide to bargain at that point and that, becomes a conversation, I think it'll end up being addressed at that point. I think part of the challenge with respect to Senator Titus's point is the implication where we end up running into situations where there's additional benefits beyond that, including potential payout of COBRA, potential challenges in that regard pose additional barriers. I think that while I'd love to see that happen and see them get full-time benefits, and certainly happy to work with you moving forward to make that a reality, we need something now. We need something that can't wait 2 years, because 2 years from now, this shortage is going to increase. It's only going to become exacerbated. And if we come back in 2 years and there's support for something of that nature, I think that'd be great if we had a pool that was in place where they were receiving full-time benefits. We're just not there at this point right now, and going from zero to widespread benefits would end up becoming a challenge. The arguments that you'll end up hearing later on in opposition to this would end up paling into comparison to what we'd hear, which would end up being, you can't guarantee that they're going to stay on. You can't force this onto the districts because we won't be able to pay for it. So where we are right now is, again, this is limited. And while we'd like to see it expanded, to your point, and I'd love to work with you on that, where we are right now is with respect to, we need something to fill the gaps. And
But the health insurance, if you only take that piece and you offer them the 500 that apply and get the long-term positions in the district, that would solve your problem.
Senator Buck, I don't disagree that would solve for the problem, but the reality of where we are today is that bill's not been brought forward. There has not been support or any offering of that. Really what that ends up looking like long-term is bargaining. And realistically, if that's the space where subs get to, where they're able to do that, that's a separate scenario. Where we are today is that there are no benefits. There is no pool of 500 that's going to get any benefit, no pay bump, no real support. In fact, what ends up happening is these individuals just get sick, they end up in the hospital, and now they get to choose between whether or not they're going to have a position moving forward. They'll lose whatever car they have or have to go get a payday loan, and then they're not going to end up being able to work moving forward. So would love to work with you on that and helping address this issue in a systemic fashion long term. But really where we are today is this is almost a stopgap emergency measure to start the process of where we need to be to provide these folks with some level of basic dignity.
And if I may just
Before we go
Yes, sir.
to you, Assemblywoman, that was Attar Azbullah, for the record, because I don't think he stated his name. And because I don't do this all the time and I don't catch it all the time, if we don't catch it, we're just going to call him Bubba from now on.
I'll take it. Thank you, Senator.
Okay. Assemblywoman?
Thank you, Senator Buck. You have a lot of very cogent responses that you are making, and the transparency with the difference between what we're seeing in the school district and the charter schools is really a little bit shocking. But I think Chandra Summer, did I say my name? Chandra Summers Armstrong, for the record, I'm sorry. But I think what we need to address and what Mr. Hesabula is stating is the critical nature of dealing with right now. And the right now is this bill. And the right now is providing some incentive and some protection, at least for health insurance for folks right now. And if we don't move on this immediately, then where are we? And that is, we are just piling on to an already existing problem and not ever presenting any type of solution. And I'd just like to finish by saying that you will hear that it's too difficult to do, that it is cost prohibitive because of administrative fees and costs and all that. you will also hear, if you listen closely, that the school districts are already tracking this data, especially those like Clark County that are offering a subsidy after an entire year of work. They know how many hours their substitutes are teaching. They know how many hours of vacancy they have each and every day. There is a system that is out there that pings teachers incessantly to try to get them to sign up to do substitute work. So we're clear that this is a need. It's just a matter of will. And do we find this issue important enough? And the people who are saving our necks every day in the classroom, are they important enough for us to do something to give them some dignity? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think there are any other questions from the committee. So tremendous job. Thank you very much. Did you have a last word? And
Just one thing, Senator Hammond, for the record, Chair Hammond, for the record. Atari Sibule, ACLU of Nevada, we did submit a few things online. There's various letters of support that tell substitute teachers firsthand account. There's also a digital petition on there with a few hundred signatures because we did not want a couple hundred people. We know you're approaching a deadline to call in today. We recognize the committee's always open to that, but we had them sign on to the petition instead to be able to save the committee a little bit of time in that regard. But this does have wide support from the community, and that's evidence there. I don't think you'll hear from very many members of the public that are opposed to this bill. I'd be surprised to hear it. So with that, we did want to thank you. And again, Senator Hammond, it's been a tremendous privilege to be able to work with you all these years. Thank you.
thank you. Well, then if you will step back for a second, we'll go ahead and take testimony in support of the measure. And I think because we're sort of limited on time, we're going to go down to Las Vegas. You can fill the chairs up here, though. Those in support can fill the chairs up here. And then if there's anybody down south in Las Vegas, I don't see anybody coming to the table down south. So we'll go ahead, and I think we have 2 calls. Do we have 5 callers? We'll go to BPS after this. So we'll go ahead and go right here in Carson City. You have 2 minutes.
Mr. Acting Chair, Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association, the voice of Nevada educators for over 120 years, in support of AB 282 to provide a subsidy for long-term or full-time substitute teachers to purchase health insurance. For many years, Nevada has struggled with an educator shortage, but since the COVID pandemic, record numbers of educators left their jobs due to low pay and severely low morale. As we end this school year, there are nearly 2,000 teacher vacancies, with districts across the state relying on long-term substitutes to cover classrooms. While we have been saying it's time for 20 to address this crisis, we also believe long-term substitutes should be guaranteed greater dignity in their work. This means access to health care addressed in AB 282. I would like to note that we also supported Senator Neal's SB 434 is introduced, which would have made long-term substitutes eligible for retirement benefits. I think that's been amended. Providing long-term substitute teachers with health insurance will strengthen our schools by attracting more qualified substitute teachers. School districts should be able to afford this additional expense with savings accumulated from teacher vacancies. Substitute teachers are critical to school operations, especially those who are relied on to fill lengthy vacancies. With many long-term substitute teachers living close to the poverty line, we should at least ensure their health needs are being met. Just in terms of response to some of the discussion, which I thought was interesting, for NSCA as an education union, we believe that this bill is less about incentivizing any particular action or behavior, and it's more about dignity and work. With that said, if there is an incentive or disincentive created by providing a floor for substitute teachers, we think it will be less about disincentivizing substitutes from pursuing a teacher's license and more about disincentivizing school districts from filling teacher positions with substitutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Mr. Daly, just so you all know, because everybody knew that I was going to be the acting chair today, I have a very strict tie policy. When you come in, you got to have a tie on. I mean, can't come in here like this. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else in support of the bill here? Then let's go ahead and go to the phones. BPS, do we have anybody on the phone in support?
To testify in support of AB 282, press star 9 to take your place in the queue.
All right, good afternoon. I hope you all can hear me up there in Carson City. For the record, my name is Brandon Summers, and I want to thank the senators for their time. I'm a substitute teacher for the Clark County School District, and I've covered 4 vacancy assignments, 3 for orchestra and 1 for math. And I would say, based on my experiences, I have no desire to jump into another vacancy ever again. And this is due to low pay, absence of benefits, and the work demands that make this an unattractive line of work. Based on my experiences with day-to-day subbing, I may stop doing this altogether. I wanted to address some of the concerns that were brought up. Number 1, we're not protected. We are expendable. And it feels that way when schools put subs on do not use lists or when the district fires subs without recourse. Number 2, schools would certainly rather have a licensed teacher in the classroom. Number 1, it fills a vacancy, and it is an indication that a long-term commitment may be made that will go beyond a semester or a year. And also, Smart Find is the system that CCSD schools, teachers, and subs use to fill day-to-day and vacancy assignments. And there are a lot of vacancy assignments, pages and pages worth of vacancy assignments for all grade levels. It would be hard to believe that a school would dump a sub suddenly at the 29th day for a licensed teacher, because the reality is licensed teachers, they're just not coming. Once school started in August, it's a wrap. These teachers are not coming. They're shopping in other jurisdictions, or they're finding different lines of work altogether. So that's all I wanted to say for now. And again, thanks for your time. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Next caller.
Hello, this is Tamika Henry. For the record, chairperson for Rise Up Nevada, and I want to vote in favor of this bill. We really need to strengthen our public education and pool for our educators and guest educators, and so I'm voting in favor of this, testifying in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next caller, I think we have another one. I just want to make sure everybody understands that down south, they're about to open up government affairs, and once they do that, we'll lose our feed to that room down there. They'll take over that room. So just so you know, we're not doing it on, well, I guess we are doing it on purpose, but we will be losing you. We don't want to, but it's going to happen, just so you know. We'll go ahead and BPS and go back to the callers if there's any online.
Chair, there are no more calls. We should testify and support at this time.
And then let's go ahead and move on to opposition. Let's go ahead and go down to Las Vegas. If there's anybody in opposition in Las Vegas, I don't see anybody. Go ahead and fill the chairs up here as well. I don't see anybody in Las Vegas moving to the table, so we'll go ahead and start up here when you sit down and you're ready to go.
My counterparts are slowly, purposefully making their way up. Patricia Haddad, Director of Government Relations for the Clark County School District. I apologize, Chair Hammond, for not bringing my tie today, but want to share our appreciation for substitute teachers, of course, for the hard work that they do each and every day to ensure that our districts can continue to operate. And then also, sorry to see Senator Neal step out, but also wanted to share appreciation for a lot of the remarks that she shared. We have many of the same concerns that were articulated and discussed here, specifically in relation to the classification of temporary employees, because substitute teachers in this sense are considered temporary employees, and that for Clark County School District that vacancy dollars cannot offset the cost of this subsidy and what the total cost would be. And so I can assure you that our fiscal note is not fake. And certainly that, you know, with that being said, any funding used for this would reduce the funding that's available for raises for teachers and support staff and administrators. So this was alluded to, but in addition to the Silver State Health Exchange, at CCSD, substitutes may opt in after 1 year of 29 and a half hours on average each week, opt into an HMO plan that is the cost of that is offset by the district, and they're eligible to do that, and then they're covered for the entire following calendar year. I'd also like to draw your attention to Section 1, Sub 2. So I think while I recognize that a proof of purchase is required, it reads as if the first month you receive the subsidy and then proof is required thereafter in subsequent months. And so one question that we do have and that came up was, what about for that subsidy for month one? And so just wanted to point that out. Appreciate the time and the discussion, and certainly the discussion around sort of looking holistically at the benefits of substitute teachers and as a state, what we might do to improve that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. But I think we also have a question for you before we move on to other testimony. Senator Doñate?
Thank you so much. Honorary chair. I prefer that term versus chair for the day. Honorary chair. I do have a question for CCSD. So in the sense of your opposition, first off, I think, so given my capacity as chairing HHS, I always pay attention to the report of which are the employers of the state that have the most employees on Medicaid, and CCSD is one of them. So I don't agree with the notion that we can't do enough. Obviously, the state fronts the bill regardless for these employees. So I guess the question is, if we were to rewrite the bill, perhaps to reduce the eligibility requirements, is there any opposition to that? If we said we believe that all individuals that are employed as, whether they're substitute teachers or if they work for a school district, that the state should cover their health insurance the same way that we have for teachers, is there any opposition to that, or is it more so towards the subsidy and how that's written?
Thank you, Senator. Patricia Haddad. So the opposition has to do with the way in which the subsidy is built out, the total amount of the subsidy and the mechanism by which it might be able to be provided. If there was an amendment referring to what you were sharing, and I was doing my best to follow, I apologize. I would have to look at the language and bring that back to the district in order to be able to tell you what our position would be.
So once again, to clarify, would there be opposition if we reduce the eligibility requirements that you have? Because it sounded that for substitute teachers, they have to wait for a certain time period, or they have to work a certain amount of days to be qualified for health insurance. Is that, you mentioned that in your testimony, is that correct?
Thank you, Senator. So currently, in order to be eligible for the health insurance plan that's provided through the district, an individual, temporary employees, including substitutes, right, not only substitutes, would have to work on average 29 and a half hours for the duration of the year, and then they would be eligible for insurance from there. I'm sorry, I apologize if I'm not understanding your question. I do apologize.
I think you just answered it. Thank you. I was mistaken. I was interpreting 29 hours per week, not per academic year. So I was misinterpreting it.
I'm so sorry. Patricia Haddad for the record. So 29 and a half hours per week over the course of a year.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we started something here, so I know that Senator Neal now has a question for you.
Thank you, Chair. So how long have you guys had that practice?
I don't have that information in front of me. I'd be happy to find it for you. Patricia Haddad for the record.
Do you at least have a ballpark? So you don't know whether or not it was 2019, 2017, 2011?
Patricia Haddad, at this moment, I do not.
Well, I can tell you this. I know it wasn't in place in 2019. So let's just start from 2019 forward and then tell me when it started. And the only reason why I know that there is no insurance for a long-term sub that's filling a vacancy is because I did it, right? So I've worked at the college and I worked at CCSD as a long-term sub, and I only filled vacancies, and I only stayed at a school site. So I'd be at whether or not it was Booker, whether or not it was West, whether or not it was Cheyenne High School, there was never any insurance, ever, unless you were going to come out of pocket and pay for it yourself. But you were never offered an insurance plan or an opportunity to have an insurance plan. I always had a private plan that I paid for myself. So I want you to start at 2019 and then move forward to 2023 because that was the last year that I worked at Cheyenne High School.
Please go ahead and respond.
Thank you, Senator. I believe that
Your name?
Sorry, Patricia Haddad for the record. I believe that the bill presenters referred to this, that there is an exhibit, and I'm happy to provide that to you directly as well, outlining, it is a letter sent to eligible employees. This is just from December of 2022 that are eligible for the plan that exists, and it outlines the coverages there. So that is currently in existence. There are individuals who are under that plan right now. Thank you.
We'll go ahead and, do you want to follow up? Okay, we're going to go offline. I was really enjoying the discussion, so I was all enthusiastic about it, but yeah, we'll take it offline. Yeah. We'll go ahead and move on with opposition testimony.
Thank you, Chair, and members of the committee. For the record, Tess Opferman here on behalf of the Washoe County School District. We also stand in opposition and do consider this an unfunded mandate. In fact, some of our rollover dollars right now we're using to give back to our full-time teachers who are having to teach extra large classes or having to take on larger classes because of our teacher shortage, so we're using some of those rollover dollars. We also consider it an unfunded mandate because the tracking piece is quite burdensome. We currently don't have the ability to figure out if a substitute teacher taught less than 70% of days in a given month. So we would need to hand track that, which would just be additional staff time. I also want to emphasize that we are doing our best at the Washoe County School District to divert funding we have to teacher and staff raises. That's very, very important to us. And also making sure that our teacher and staff have necessary benefits. In fact, one thing that we have done in this past year is limit the wait time, shorten the wait time that full-time teachers have to wait in order to get health care benefits. And so that was very, very important to Superintendent Enfield when she came to the Washoe County School District. And she's now shortened that time frame because we do know that health benefits are important to our teachers, and we want to make sure they're getting those. The last comment I want to make is that I know there was a comment about school districts hiring subs or trying to bring on subs rather than teachers because they're less expensive. For us, at least at the Washoe County School District, that is certainly not the case. We absolutely want teachers. We are doing our best to hire teachers. And across the board, we feel the emphasis should be on giving raises and giving appropriate living salaries to the staff and full-time teachers that we currently have. And by no means are we attempting to hire subs to save dollars. We want full-time teachers, and we want to make sure we keep them in our school district. So thank you. With that, we are in opposition.
Thank you. Before we begin, make sure we silence all phones because we don't need to take phone calls. Kanani, was that for me or was that for somebody else? That was for me? All right. Well, I'll take that later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sub-Chair, or I'm sorry, temporary chair. Sub-Chair isn't a good idea, is it? Okay, anyway, good afternoon, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mary Brzezinski, here representing the Nevada Association of School Superintendents, and we really want to appreciate the sponsor of this bill for the thoughtfulness in trying to help out our substitute teachers. And as a former substitute teacher, I mean, I get it. But the superintendents have some concerns about this. I think the first concern is this really should be a local decision, how you want to handle your substitute teachers and how you want to attract substitute teachers. And this bill would make it across the state how teachers and subs have to be paid and how the whole process is carried out. So we feel that it should be a local decision, first of all. And then secondly, it's a little bit confusing about and maybe that's just our confusion here, but we would have a question about a full-time, you become a full-time sub after 30 days, but then if you don't work up to, let's say you don't work the next 45 days, then you lose this. But once you, the bill says that once you reach that 30 consecutive days, then you do have that full-time status for the rest of the school year, as long as you at least work 70% of the time. And on a 20-day school month, that would be, you have to work about 14 days a month. So there are, I guess it kind of boils down to, if you're lucky enough to get the first 30 days in, then you're okay. But if I'm a sub and I don't get that first 30 days in, I'm working 14, 15, 16 days a month, and I'm not getting the health insurance. So anyway, that's perhaps just confusion on our part, but thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your testimony. We're going to move on to, is there anybody else in opposition? We'll move on to neutral testimony, and we'll remind Ms. Espinosa that the phones need to be silenced. This is strike 2. Strike 3, we remove you from the room. Any opposition here, or I'm sorry, any neutral testimony? BPS, how about online? Is there anybody online?
If you would like to testify neutral to AB 282, press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers wishing to testify neutral at this time.
All right. I don't. Oh, there they are in the back. Do you guys want to summarize briefly? We've spent a lot of time on this already.
For the record, Atara Boulay, CLU of Nevada. Yes, we will be very brief. Just a couple things. So we did hear, obviously, the opposition. Again, to clarify CCSD's policy, you need to work for an entire year and meet their threshold of basically being a full-time employee for a year to be offered the policy. So the reason why you probably haven't heard about it is because nobody's going to end up being there the next year to end up receiving it. If we look at the aggregate numbers, they don't follow through the following year. And so it doesn't end up being a provision that ends up applicable in that regard, because it may be the single worst benefit offer that exists, to work for a full year before you receive benefits. No other employer does that. Almost every employer is doing 30 days and you're eligible for benefits, except apparently if you're a substitute teacher or another temporary employee. Second, with respect to the superintendent's concern about this being a local decision, well, the local governments have decided. And their policy that they've decided on is they don't want to give any substitute teachers benefits in this regard, or a subsidy. They could have done so voluntarily. Since the inception of the educational system in the state of Nevada, they have chosen not to. And in fact, certain districts, including CCSD, have expressly prohibited any benefits from being received. So to the degree that it becomes a matter of local concern, your local governments and your local superintendents have already decided that they do not value this specific provision in terms of benefits and subsidies or potential benefits to be received in this regard. Third, we heard that our districts value our substitute educators. What good are your values or your concept of values if you refuse to adequately take care of your employee force? And at this point, that's not happening. So as much as anybody might say, we love these folks, we care about these folks, if you care about them and you love them and you believe in them and you support them, then give them a subsidy for health insurance and be able to move. Allow them to have some level of dignity should they end up getting sick. With respect to any other concerns about statutory construction, obviously happy to answer any questions offline as well. And I've also made myself available to anybody in opposition to this to be able to explain it to them as well. But from our vantage point, the parameters are clear. There's no vague elements associated with this. This is the most simple and straightforward pathway we can get to making sure that these benefits are put in place for our substitute educators. And they should feel a sense of dignity and support coming out of this legislative body as well, once they hear that, hey, somebody's finally decided to listen to our concerns and finally cares about us enough that if we end up in ambulatory care and we end up in a hospital setting, that there's actually the ability to not have to worry so much because they were able to purchase health insurance. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Chandra Summers Armstrong for the record. Thank you all so much for your time, for listening attentively. I think Atar has kind of covered it all. I just want to tell you thank you. And just remember that when we talk about financial stability and we talk about one of the biggest risks for people getting into financial trouble are medical bills. The number one reason why people in the United States of America file for bankruptcy is because of medical bills. And we just don't want to be in a situation where we're not recognizing that. And backing up what we say with what we do, which is to offer this benefit to the very people who are saving are next when it comes to providing education in this very difficult time for education. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman, and thank you for your presentation. We'll go ahead and close the hearing on Assembly Bill 282, and we're going to open it up to a work session. And we're going to turn the time over to our policy analyst, Ms. Jen Sturm Gaynor, to go through the first bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jen Sturm Gaynor, Committee Policy Analyst. Again, as nonpartisan staff, I can either advocate for or against any measure. The first bill on work session today is Assembly Bill 74, which was presented by Assemblywoman Mosca on May 3rd. The bill authorizes the Board of Regents of the University of Nevada to enter into an agreement with a public or private entity to promote and enhance an educational program or student life at an institution and outline certain provisions for such agreements, including certain provisions relating to prevailing wage. The bill further determines that any such agreement is subject to certain policies established by the Board of Regents. And we do have a couple amendments proposed for this. The first is attached to the document, which is Senator Daley had proposed an amendment that defines and prescribes requirements for the development of facilities using a public-private partnership, including authorizing a public body to enter into such an agreement to plan, finance, design, construct, improve, maintain, operate, or acquire a facility. And the second amendment presented by or proposed by Warren Hardy of Warren Hardy Strategies would clarify that the bidding required in subsection 4 of Senator Daley's proposed amendment is bidding associated with the selected procurement process. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions about the amendments of the bill? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion. We have a motion by Senator Lang, second by Senator Doñate. Is that an amend and do pass, Madam? Yes. As an amend and do pass, a second. And any, just testing, any comment on the motion? No. Senator Buck?
Thank you, Chair Hammond. I'm going to be a no today. I was fine before the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Senator Tice?
Thank you, Mr. Honorary Chair. I will also be a no today. The amendment was basically a non-starter for me, defining that all public-private partnerships would include this collective bargaining and our prevailing wage, and that is something that I cannot support. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, go ahead and take a vote on the bill itself. All those in favor of this, what is it, Assembly Bill 74, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. Nay. All right, we have two in opposition, Senator Titus and Senator Buck. And we'll go to the next bill. Oh, we'll assign that floor, let's see. How about Senator Neal? Thank you. All right, Ms. Sturm Gaynor.
Thank you, Chair Hammond. The next bill, Jen Sturm Gaynor, Committee Policy Analyst. The next bill is Assembly Bill 256, which is sponsored by Assemblywoman Mosca, and we heard this bill May 5th. The bill, as introduced, revises the definition of volunteer to exclude certain employees whose place of work participates in a work-based learning program other than the employee who directly oversees a pupil in the program. It requires pupils who participate in work-based learning to complete training related to harassment and unhealthy relationships in the workplace. It requires the Department of Education to prescribe a method for a school district board of trustees to determine if an entity's work-based learning volunteer must follow certain fingerprinting provisions. And it authorizes the Board of Trustees of a school district to exempt certain work-based learning volunteers from the requirement to submit fingerprints for a background check. And there are a couple proposed amendments. Assemblywoman Mosca proposed requiring pupils to complete training on the signs of grooming that fosters the goal of creating inappropriate personal and professional relationships as part of the training required prior to participating in a work-based learning program. And two, the amendment would require that a background check be completed for anyone with an employer participating in a work-based learning program who either directly supervises or has unsupervised contact with a pupil in such a program, and allows businesses to be exempted from this requirement by a school district if it is vetted according to the Department of Education processes. Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Is there any discussion on the amendments, Senator Titus?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I absolutely will be supporting this bill with the amendments, and I appreciate the sponsor hearing our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Then I'll entertain a motion. Is that amend and do pass? We have a motion from Senator Titus to amend and do pass, and a second from Senator Buck. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and take a vote on the measure. All those in favor of the bill? Any opposed? Unanimous. And we'll go ahead and we'll assign that to Senator Neal. Awesome. Thank you very much. Jen Stern Gaynor, please go on to the next one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next, Jen Sturm Gaynor, Committee Policy Analyst. The next bill on work session is Assembly Bill 274, which was presented by Assemblyman Nguyen, and this bill was heard on May 1st. The bill makes various changes to the State Financial Literacy Advisory Council, including changing its membership and adding one member who is a pupil enrolled in high school. It places it under the Department of Education, and it provides that the Superintendent of Public Instruction must appoint its members. The bill also revises the 1/2 credit of economics in which a pupil, or in which a public high school pupil must enroll to include financial literacy, and it adds understanding and budgeting for certain costs to the description of skills necessary to manage finances. Mr. Chair.
Is that amended? There's no
Jen Sturm Gaynor for the record, and there are no proposed amendments at this time.
Thank you very much. Any questions? I'll entertain a motion. We have a motion to do pass from Senator Lang and a second from Senator Buck. Any question on the motion? All those in favor of Assembly Bill 274 say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Very good. Passes unanimously. And we'll go ahead and assign this to, let's see, how about Senator Neal? Senator Neal, thank you very much. Jen Stern Gaynor, let's go on to the next one.
Thank you, Chair Hammond. Jen Sturm Gaynor, Committee Policy Analyst. Next bill in work session today is Assembly Bill 372, which is sponsored by Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod. We heard this bill on May 3rd. The bill authorizes the Board of Regents of the University of Nevada to enter into an agreement with a nonprofit organization, community entity, or governmental agency to jointly provide families and caretakers with training, workshops, and resources designed to facilitate family involvement in early childhood education. The bill further outlines certain provisions relating to such agreements, including the standards that must be met by the organization, entity, or agency, and an allocation of any shared costs. And at this time, there are no proposed amendments. Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions? I'll take a motion. I have a motion from Senator Lang. Second from Senator Flores. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? All right, that goes out a unanimous. Let's see. Senator Neal, would you like to take that one too, please? Thank you. Jen Stern Gaynor.
Thank you, Chair Hammond. Jen Sturm Gaynor, Committee Policy Analyst for the record. The next bill on work session today is Assembly Bill 423, which was presented by Assemblywoman Torres on May 3rd. The bill prohibits a board of trustees of a school district from taking any action at a regular or special meeting after 11:59 p.m. on the day of the meeting, except in an emergency that impacts the school district. If the board of trustees has not acted on an agenda item before that time, then the board of trustees must schedule the delayed agenda item at a future meeting or wait at least 24 hours after the originally scheduled meeting time, but not later than 3 business days to act on the delayed agenda item. Finally, the bill, as introduced, authorizes but does not require a board of trustees to restrict public comment at a regular or special meeting if the public comment meets certain criteria. The bill page, as shown here, says there are no proposed amendments. After printing of this bill page, however, a proposed amendment was submitted, which deletes subsection 7 of section 1 concerning allowing a Board of Trustees to restrict public comment in certain circumstances. And Mr. Chair, I believe the bill sponsor is here if there are any questions for the committee.
Thank you, Jen. And so we have, before us, we have the amendment, and we do have the bill sponsor here. If there's anybody who has any questions, we can bring her up to the table. No? All right, then we'll go ahead and take a motion. I'm ready for that. We have a motion to amend and do pass from Senator Flores, a second from, I think it's Senator Doñate. And any discussion on the motion? Senator Titus?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Initially, I was an absolute no on this bill because of the fact that it would, of the section that was removed. So I do appreciate the author of this bill removing that section, and I appreciate a person's right to make a comment at these public hearings. And so thank you for that, and I will be supporting this bill.
Very good. Any other comments? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and take a motion, or let's take a vote on the amend and do pass motion. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? All right, let's see. It goes out unanimously, and we'll go ahead and assign that floor statement to Senator Neal. Senator Neal, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I think that ends the work session, and we'll go ahead and open up a hearing on Assembly Bill 241. Assemblywoman Mosca. I always get that wrong. I hope it's right, Mosca. We'll go ahead and open it up.
Thank you, Honorary Chair and Senate Committee on Education. This is the last time you'll see me, so I appreciate you. And I have to keep it going and thank you. In 2017, the first time I was ever in this body with young people, you hosted one of our students who just graduated from UNLV this weekend. So thank you for that. I'm excited to be here to talk about a pretty big policy change, which would be 241. I appreciate that I'm going to share both my personal and my professional experience. I'll quickly review the national context as well as what's happening in our state. And during the assembly hearing, I did have Dr. Tanya Holmes-Sutton with me to talk about an educator perspective, but she shared her letter of support today to save time. And during the assembly committee, I also had Eddie Martinez, who is a current UNR student, to share a student perspective, and he has given me permission to summarize his thoughts today, and I will end by going over the bill. And so, according to the Stanford Social Innovation Review, a proximate leader is defined as someone who's experienced the injustice they're trying to solve. Growing up, I had the most loving and caring parents who I would not be here without today. My dad immigrated to the U.S. at 17 and learned English from Sesame Street. He has his GED. He met my mom, who was a senior in high school, the same year he immigrated here. My mother left home before graduating from high school and moved in with my dad because of issues in her own household. They had me 3 years later. My home life could be tumultuous, not because they didn't love me or weren't trying their very best to put a roof over our head and food on the table, but because of the systemic inequities they were facing every single day. My dad worked nights so that someone could pick us up from school, so they never saw each other. We lived paycheck to paycheck, and they tried their best to make ends meet. This caused me to move to 7 different schools growing up, and every time we moved, we were reaching another rung of economic stability. Though I experienced eviction, the judgmental looks of buying food on food stamps, or walking to school because our one car was repossessed, school was always the most stable and important place in my life. But sometimes, school saw my home life, the poverty we lived in, my young parents, or my immigrant father, before they saw my potential. In the 7th grade, after earning straight A's, I was not tracked into accelerated courses that we know put students on a college pathway in high school. My 7th grade English language arts teacher, finding this out the first week of my 8th grade year, was so irate, she walked to the principal's office and got my classes changed. In the 11th grade, I moved to a new high school in a much higher economic area because my dad would be paid a better hourly rate. I was the one who wrote his resume, and we did not understand that we would be in the same economic position because of the increased cost of living. However, for the first time, I went to a non-Title I school. But now, though I was ranked in the top 20 of my class in my first high school, this new school showed me everything I didn't have access to. I had to retake classes I had already earned A's in and struggled for the first time in my life academically. I didn't know any better other than that the one place I found solace and success was no longer that place for me. But because I went to that better school, I was able to get a scholarship to attend college as the first in my family to graduate, and no surprise, wanted to move somewhere in a community similar to the one I grew up with and help young people like me. As an educator, teaching, working on policy for the superintendent, and supporting students in the nonprofit I started every day, I've seen the same issues of low expectations for our most marginalized youth, better quality in some schools versus others based on zip code, and young people who just needed school to be their place to thrive. And I want to say here now, because I think it's very important, that this is not all teachers or counselors or all systems. Mrs. Jackson, who got my classes changed in the 7th grade, is my lifesaver. I believe and know most teachers are this to students. But as a system, we know that tracking for our most marginalized students happens and that their whole lives' futures are impacted by this. Whether it's Linda, who's in a picture here, whose counselor told her to stop asking for letters of recommendations because she was going to stay local anyways. She's now a UNR graduate who goes to Touro University and is on her way to becoming a PA. To Eddie, whose story I will share later today, this is an issue in our state that students do face. And so hopefully this is also in front of you. I know it's hard to see, but we really wanted to think then, what could we do as a state pragmatically to solve this issue that we know we have, while also understanding there's a teacher shortage, we know there's a support staff shortage, especially in light of what we just heard in the hearing before, and we know about per pupil funding. So I know there are so many factors that make our system the way it is, and I want to say again, we're not blaming anyone, but instead trying to find a system, solution for young people so they won't have to suffer from the long-term consequences. So what can we do? One thing we came up with was to make the College and Career Readiness Diploma opt-out versus opt-in. So the College and Career Readiness Diploma is the highest standard that we have for young people in our state. And by not making them sign up and know that they should be on this, we hope that we're just lessening one barrier. So what this slide shows is the differences in these diplomas. These are set by the state, the diplomas are, and there are 3 things I wanted to point out. One is that you'll see here that the electives are the same, so it's the same elective total. 2, there is a GPA requirement, so that's really important. This bill does not say that every young person must graduate on this diploma. We are not trying to make it harder for young people to graduate, and we're also not trying to make grade inflation, which we think could be an unintended consequence. All we're trying to do is give young people access, so if they don't want to be on this diploma, they can opt out. They don't have to be. But at least by putting them on this track, they don't have to advocate to their counselor why they should be on it. Every career tech school, at least in the Clark County School District, every young person who goes to that school is automatically on the College and Career Readiness Diploma. So we're just trying to create equity. And the last thing I'll say is what is different is here on this right side, but I would make an argument, I think, that we would want all young people to have access to these courses. So the 3 things that's included are a foreign language, AP, IB, or dual credit, and also career tech and work-based learning. So it's not just about college, it's also about career. So if a young person took 2 years on a career track, that would actually count towards this diploma. And then finally, you'll see on the endorsements at the bottom, and again, we are not trying to make this the requirement. We just want all young people to have access to this diploma. And so I'll go pretty quick now for the rest of them. Just nationally, there are 35 states that have some type of college and career readiness diploma, but there is no standardization across the country of how we put students on these. So it exists, but there isn't a standardization. And then I thank the LCB staff who worked with me before session started because I really wanted to understand what other states were doing. And so these were just three that I thought were interesting. They had some academic planning. We did see that there were different diploma options, but again, there's not a standardization. And so what I think is the most important is when it comes to here in our state. So why am I really trying to do this? Well, first, less than half of our students graduate on the advanced or the college and career readiness diploma. So that's what's circled here. And when it comes to access, that's really when my qualitative story matches up with our quantitative data, especially for our most marginalized youth who have disproportionate access. So when we see our Black and Latino youth have much lower access rates to these higher standards, both the college and career readiness diploma as well as the advanced diploma. And when we look at subgroups, it's even worse. And then finally, the question that I really wanted answered is, in my work, we really talk about what happens 10 years later, 20 years later, to ensure that young people were able to fill whatever their dream is through equitable access. And speaking to NSHE, we were not able to get the completion data. That's not available. They're working on that, but that's not available right now. However, we were able to look at access data. So if you look at this, it really shows that a student has a better chance of attending an NSHE institution if they've graduated on the CCR or advanced diploma, and they have a better chance of going to a four-year institution as well. So a very quick summary. Eddie is and he said that I could share this. He's a Latino male from East Las Vegas. I met him in the 9th grade. He went to a comprehensive high school, and though he dreamed of becoming an engineer, he did have a middle school teacher tell him he would become a dropout, and a high school counselor that never helped him with college access towards his goals. However, he was able to transfer to another Clark County School District school, CSN High School, where all students are on the CCR track. Today, he is a senior at UNR, that's why he's not here today, and he wanted to share that he supports this bill because he wonders if he never knew to transfer to this other school, where would he be today, and he wanted to help all students. And so again, I think 99% of educators and teachers are amazing, and we're all just doing our best, but I wanted to give an opportunity for our young people to have as much easy access as possible. So I will very briefly go over the bill. I would share that this bill is co-sponsored by every Assembly Education Committee member except two. And there are some conceptual amendments as well, because we're continuing to work on it to make sure that we have the best thing possible. So on page 3, that's where it starts at the bottom, sub 5, that makes it opt out. One of the conceptual amendments that is included is that different districts have different diplomas. So even though our state has certain diplomas, Washoe County, for example, still has the honors diploma. And I think it's really important when speaking to teachers, we didn't want to do anything that would impact young people. So we put in language that they would be opted in to the CCR or equivalent or higher diploma, so that if a young person wanted to be on the honors diploma, they could still take an honors class in the 9th grade, and then they could still do both. So it doesn't impact them. On page 4 here, we put in a conceptual amendment that the State Board of Education would come up with a standardized process. So after the 9th grade, a young person can say, I don't want to be on this diploma. And that's fine, because we don't want to be, we don't want to tell students what to do. We want to give them access so they know options. And so in the conceptual amendment, it says that the State Board of Ed will come up with a standardized process, so everyone in the state is doing the same thing. And based on what happened in the Assembly Education Committee, we put that a counselor, a parent, and an admin would have to be in this meeting. We talked a lot about admin, having time to do that, but at least they could sign off so they know trends in their schools. Next, for IEPs and 504 plans, we had a robust discussion, young people would still have access to this diploma, but if it interferes with the 504, the IEP, this allows for that, so that young people can follow their individualized education plan. And then last three things for section 1.5, we really didn't want to put in statute the actual diploma. We didn't, every 2 years, we don't want to be the ones in case it needs to change. So we're going to, the conceptual amendment takes this out and just says that the State Board of Ed would make the, which it currently does, can change the diploma requirements versus it being in our legislation. And finally, you'll see on section 2, we also know that this is a big change, so we wanted to have a stair-stepped and pragmatic approach for districts. And so I thank you for your time, for considering this. And though this is a policy committee, I do want to say on the record, we support the fiscal implication it would take to make this bill happen for all students in all districts, and that I'm now open for questions.
All right, let's go ahead and start with Senator Buck over here to my left.
Thank you so much, Chair Hammond. So I agree with a lot of your sentiments. In fact, I feel that this is really the first piece of legislation this session that's actually student-centered, and it's about making a difference in student achievement and increasing student achievement. We've never increased student achievement by lowering expectations. And I love this bill because many districts do like an algebra over the weekend, and just various things to hit these credits. But it's not about making sure that students actually have the skills after they take the class, right? And you alluded to this with the grade inflation, and that, maybe there's not sometimes honesty in if students can actually perform the skills. So I just wondered, how can you ensure proficiency or adequate skills without end of course exams? I want to make sure that they're proficient when they leave. They can actually do what that class says that they can do.
Thank you, Senator Buck, and I really appreciate that, especially because I know that you are a long-term educator, and I think that that's a great question. I don't think it's a great answer, but it's true. I don't think that this bill would address that, and I think that is a point. For us, we just actually want to start even 3 steps before that how do you just make sure all students, despite which school they go to, actually access this material. So I think that's a next step. After access, you have to get to success and making sure there's mastery and that young people know it. But right now, we know that our students don't even have access. So we're just trying to start there.
So I agree with you. And there is a discrepancy. When you go to different schools, as I was supervising student teachers, you'd go to an at-risk school, and it's always lower expectations. You can tell the ones that have lower expectations, as opposed to the higher expectations in some of the other schools. And so then you can see where every year the gap gets wider and wider. And we see that in student achievement data. So I appreciate you. I commend your work on this bill, but I would like to see the next step eventually to where we can actually, if they're in this track, can they actually do it when they graduate from that class?
And I'm not sure if there's a question in there, but is this more of a comment? Okay. Okay, then I know Senator Titus wanted to go, but I feel like I need to defer to Senator Neal because I already piled on her today. So I'm going to let her go, and then I'll go to you, Senator Titus.
Thank you, Chair. So I had a question on section 1.5. This has the language piece in there, but it said, I believe there is, like if they don't do the language section, it allows for an alternative. And I was wondering, does this allow them to test out if they don't take the dual language?
Thank you, Senator Neal. That's a great question. And I'll just say for 1.5, we're going to make sure that that's not in here because we want it to be through the State Board of Ed. So we're not legislating the diploma requirements. So this is the current diploma requirement. And I'll say one thing and then I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask the chair if we can ask legal, but they can do, if they don't do the language, they can do the AP IB dual enrollment, that counts. And if they don't do that, then they could do the career tech and that counts. But for your question about language, Chair, can we please ask legal or someone?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because I was looking at it. I thought this was a proposed language. So if we could get clarification from legal, that'd be great. I think he's here today. Good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Pro Tem, Asher Killian, Committee Counsel.
4 different titles in 2 hours.
Yes, so Section 1.5 of the bill does just bring in the current CCR diploma requirements from NAC 390-443. For the language portion, the regs, as they currently exist, and the language in the bill, only require a demonstration of proficiency in speaking not less than 2 languages. So it doesn't necessarily require coursework to be completed, but there would be an option to demonstrate proficiency in a manner other than coursework to satisfy that requirement.
Can I follow it? So I'm glad that, because I just remember, being able to test out. But the second question is, if State Board is going to adopt the requirements, how are you making sure that your intent of having the higher standard is going to be applied across the board? And then when you talk about that, can you also talk about how we bridge them before 9th grade in middle school? Because 6th, 7th, and 8th matters, really 5th grade matters, but there's some bridging that has to occur and I agree with your expectations. I absolutely agree with having a higher standard, but can you address that?
Erica Mosca for the record. Thank you, Senator Neal. Those are great questions. I think I was here when I heard you tell my other freshman colleague how important it is that we're following up to make sure. In Section 2 on page 5, we do have this stair-step approach where they will do each class, and the difference would be that they are automatically, with their counselor, put on that track, and that they would have to stay on that track until they opted out. So that's the provision that we're trying to have, I guess, not accountability, but have teeth to make sure we're actually checking it. And I think you are so right about bridging, right? That's why my counselor knew to change my coursework in the 7th grade, because that changed my entire life and is why I can even be here today. And so I would just say, at least in the Clark County School District, I've had a lot of discussions with the College and Career Ready associate superintendent, who has started to do some work to do articulation patterns from the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and then make sure that it actually flows up. We know, just like Senator Buck's question, that is the much larger discussion, and how do we not set up our students for failure as well? And so I think that's going to be very important, hopefully, for the districts, that if this does go through, we really have to look at all of our backwards mapped articulation patterns to make sure that that rigor and access is there, that we don't just put them on this, and then in the 10th grade, they all opt out because it was too hard.
One more follow-up, yeah, because we're getting late in the day, and I'm getting looks.
Okay. So, number one, this is really good. I'm just hoping you're probably going to have to do a little bit more. You're going to have to stay on track of this and really be with NDE, because the exact thing that you're bringing up now is the same thing that was happening in like 2010, right? So we talk about the stair step, but the curric didn't match the courses that they were lined up to, right? So for science, they may have had principle of science, but they needed chemistry, and they didn't take chemistry. And so there was a need to, even in math, to try to figure out how to get them to the level that they needed to be just for basic graduation. And I'm not saying this as like it's a problem in the district, but I ended up I created like an outside program in order to help try to get them proficient, because their proficiencies didn't match. And so in 2010, it was Project Save, and it was a grant But literally, the fact that you're still having this discussion right now about AP and not having access to it, you know, it just says something about, you know, where we're progressing in terms of the district and how we view our own kids.
Thank you, Senator Titus.
Thank you, sir. Section 1.7, I just have a question on that one. I appreciate my colleagues' questioning along the line of the steps and the available classes. But on that one, it says, complete a college readiness assessment prescribed by the Board of Regents. Is that, I'm not familiar with that. Is there only one of those that the Board of Regents produces, or does each college have a different one that they ask for? Is there one that you can go online and take? Can you just fill me on that process? So that's 1.7, number A.
Thank you, Senator Titus. That's a great question. Honorary Chair, can I ask legal?
Yes, you absolutely can. Can we get legal to weigh in on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair per diem. So this language is also from current regulation, NAC 390-550, and the reference to a college college readiness assessment. That's something that the State Board of Education already prescribes by law. I believe currently they use the ACT as the college readiness assessment. I'm staring into the audience to see if the Department of Education will nod their head at me, but I believe that's what's currently established by law.
So is that correct then? Because that would be the ACT, then that would answer that question.
We have somebody from NDE here. We'll go ahead and let him approach the bench. Mr. Stuckey, can you enlighten us?
Thank you, Chair. Temporary Chair Senator Hammond, through you to Senator Titus. So the Nevada System of Higher Education's co-requisite and college-ready gateway policy is what we utilize for the assessment. The Board of Regents Handbook, Title 4, Chapter 16, Section 1, and I will send this to all of you as well, has the ACT with an English score of over 18, an ELA score over 20, and a math score over 22. The SAT evidence-based reading and writing with a score of over 480, math over 530, and then SBAC English, which says Smarter Balance Assessment. I'm assuming corporation is a C, sorry. English is a score greater than or equal to 2583, which is an achievement level of 3, or math, which is greater than or equal to 2628, which is an achievement level of 3. But I'll send that to all of you in writing.
Great,
so
thank you.
have
And a follow-up?
Yes, please.
I have just a little concern again about the language requirement. I happen to like Saturday Night Live, and I saw a skit on a repeat skit here just a couple weeks ago in a class where there were students taking Spanish, and they were being taught by a person that didn't really know Spanish very well, other than that they had learned it themselves. And then they had a couple true bilingual students show up in the classroom and totally destroyed this poor teacher. So having the mandatory bilingual or two-language proficiency, I have some concerns about those, and it may be standard, but I worry that our kids frequently can't even pass an English proficiency test, let alone be proficient. I mean, and that's their primary language, but they can't pass their English classes. So I'm concerned about that, but that was a question that was addressed. And just a final comment, thank you for your advocacy. I too had a teacher that I was very poor growing up in Smith Valley. Literally, my dad made $3,000 a year. I graduated from high school. They weren't going to be able to help me, but fortunately, I had my chemistry teacher knew I was smart and advocated for me and put me in the right direction to end up with a scholarship in chemical engineering, which that changed my life too. So thank you for that, and glad that there are teachers out there that still are there. But we do need to help those that don't have those teachers. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a pregunta in there. Thank you. But I think there's an SNL skit that just got brought up, believe it or not, in this committee. Why is everything happening right now? I don't know. But any additional questions? No? All right. We'll go ahead and have you step back, Assemblywoman, and we'll go ahead and take testimony in support of AB 241. And we'll go ahead and start with the most language proficient person at the table.
For the record, Chelsea Capurro. Here on behalf of the Urban Chamber and the Nevada Association of School Administrators, I'm going to be real quick. We are very much in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to start by thanking you for your service and acknowledging that I didn't get the tie memo, but as a former constituent of yours and a fellow Yankees fan, I'm hoping you'll let me slide. My name is Anthony Curry. I'm the Director of Public Policy at Opportunity 180. In 2022, only 26% of high school graduates in Nevada obtained a college and career-ready diploma. The same year, the state's average ACT score was 17.3, well behind the 22 that serves as the general baseline to be considered college and career-ready. The college and career-ready diploma track is not accessible for every student, putting them at a significant disadvantage at a pivotal moment in their lives. The coursework involved in the college and career-ready diploma program helps students to be prepared, active participants in the community and our democracy. Lastly, this bill sets high expectations and sends a powerful message that every kid deserves an opportunity to succeed. For these reasons, we are proud to support AB 241 and appreciate the committee's consideration of this bill.
Thank you. And we will go ahead and let the tie slide. If you can tell me who played first base in 1977 for the Yankees later on.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Ashley Cruz with Career Nevada for the record, here on behalf of the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance. As the Greater Vegas Region's Economic Development Authority, we appreciate Assemblywoman Mosca's efforts and support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Chair. For the record, Alejandro Rodriguez with the Nevada System of Higher Education. NCHE is in support of AB 241. The analysis NCHE has done of the CCR diploma and ACT scores shows a strong positive relationship. This bill begins from a place of high standards, which our faculty want, rather than requiring students to opt into the higher standards, while still allowing students and their families a chance to opt out later. So we urge your support. Thank you.
Patricia Haddad, Director of Government Relations for the Clark County School District, ditto, and we are very much in support of this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mary Przenski, here representing Nevada Association of School Superintendents, and we are in support of the bill. Thank you.
All right. Can't wait for this one. Go ahead.
Oh, it's coming, Chair. Kanani Espinoza on behalf of UNLV and Nevada State College. I will keep it brief. We are in support. And Chair, I apologize for the previous disturbances. It had to happen to me once this session, and it was for you. And I am glad I didn't make it to strike 3.
Time's not over yet.
Good afternoon, Chair Hammond and members of the committee. Dylan Keith with the Vegas Chamber. I would very much like to thank the bill sponsor for bringing this bill forward. It does focus purely on student achievement and makes it equitable for all of Nevada students. For that point, the Vegas Chamber is very much so in support. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Nick Vasiliadis for the record. On behalf of the Nevada Resort Association, not to belabor the point, us too. Thank you.
Mr. Temporary Chair, members of the committee, Michael Flores on behalf of the University of Nevada, Reno. I want to thank the sponsor for bringing this forward, and we're full support of AB 241. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Eric Zhang, Acting Executive Director for One APN Nevada, but also here today as Director of Outreach for Asian Community Development Council, ACDC, that has hosted 8 annual College Readiness Boot Camp, about to host our 9th, and we are in full support of this bill, and thank Assemblywoman Mosca for presenting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody, I don't think we have Las Vegas online anymore, so is there anybody in support of the measure online, BPS?
To testify in support of AB 41, press star 9 to take your place.
Hello, Chair Hammond, members of the Senate Committee on Education. This is Gil Lopez with the Charter School Association of Nevada, here in full support of AB 241. We should have a high standards for our students, so therefore we urge you to support this bill. I want to thank the Assemblywoman for bringing the bill forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Honorary Chair Hammond and members of the Senate Education Committee. My name is Jeff Horn, and I'm the Executive Director of the Clark County Association of School Administrators and Professional Technical Employees, also known as CASAPI. We represent approximately 1,450 CCSD administrators, of which nearly 98% are members. As a former high school principal, I know firsthand the positive impact of a teacher or administrator who believes in a student and encourages them to achieve at a higher level. Students need adults in their lives to inspire and motivate them, especially when these same students doubt their own abilities. The expectation that every high school student can achieve a college and career-ready high school diploma sets the stage for high expectations that will ultimately increase student outcomes. CASAPI supports AB 241 and appreciates Assemblywoman Mosca for sponsoring this bill. And Senator Hammond, I just want you to know I am wearing a tie. Thank you for your time.
I totally see that now. Next.
Hello, Chair and members of the Senate Education Committee. I'm Kevin Osorio Hernandez for the record. I want to first start by thanking Assemblywoman Erica Mosca. She represents my district, and I'm so thankful she represents the best interests of everyone, especially students in the Assembly. I wish I had this when I was in high school, and now I'm at Nevada State College pursuing my history degree, and I'm so thankful for that. I am in full support.
Caller, could you please give us your name one more time? Sorry about that.
No worries. My name is Kevin Osorio Hernandez. For the record, that's KEVIN-OSORIO, Hernandez, HERNANDEZ.
Thank you very much. Next caller, please.
Good afternoon, Chair Pro Day Hammond and members of the committee. For the record, Jack Easy, representing the RTC of Southern Nevada. Just want to echo the sentiments of my colleagues and added that Southern Nevada Strong, which is our regional plan, a top priority within that plan is improving economic competitiveness and education in the region. And so we really think this will help prepare students for better colleges and careers, and that'll in turn support workforce development and make Southern Nevada more economically competitive. So we urge your support, and thanks for your time. Thanks.
Thank you. Next caller, please.
Evening, members on the Senate Committee on Education. My name is Alexander Avila. Avila as in A-V, as in Victor, I-L-A. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today, and also for Assemblywoman Mosca for bringing this bill forward. As a student currently at UNLV, I wish I had this chance back when I was graduating high school in 2016 prior to that. This is a really good bill, seeing what's going to be coming for the next generations of students here in Nevada. This is amazing, honestly, and I just wish this was available to us back then. I know a lot of colleagues of mine and other students who attended high school years prior we really wish there was something like this available to us, just because we're at a point of our lives where we're still figuring things out, but we're glad to see this happening now, and so I really appreciate it, and we hope to see this going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead. Next caller.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Tamika Henry for the record, representing Rise Up Nevada here. On behalf of parents, we really want to support AB 241, and we thank you, Assemblywoman Mosca. This will absolutely help our students. My daughter is currently a student at Nevada State College, and I know that she benefited from this diploma. So I appreciate you, and I am in full support, as well as Rise Up Nevada. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead. Next caller.
Hi, this is Peter Guzman, president of the Latin Chamber of Commerce, in full support of this bill. Giving more choices, more opportunities towards education, that is always a plus. I commend Assemblywoman Mosca for bringing such sensible legislation forward. Again, Latin Chamber of Commerce in full support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guzman. I was kind of expecting a little bit more, though, right? Gonna let us down. Go ahead, next caller.
Good afternoon, Honorary Chair Hammond and Senate Committee on Education. Annette Dawson Owens of the Children's Advocacy Alliance, currently serving as the School Readiness Policy Director. We are in full support of AB 241 and thank Assemblywoman Mosca for bringing this bill forward, which will allow all students to be automatically enrolled into a college and career path and the ability to be fully prepared for future success upon graduation. We know education can be a highway on and off in one's life and different paths in one's life. We know that we'll be raising the bar and allowing all of our students access to a high quality education and preparing them to be proficient for the jobs and their futures in Nevada. Thank you for all your work and championing the needs and successes of all of our Nevada students.
Thank you very much. Next one, please.
Chair, there are no more callers who testify in support at this time.
Thank you very much. We'll go ahead and move to opposition. Is there anybody here in Carson City in opposition? Go ahead and start when you're ready.
Mr. Chair, Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association, the voice of Nevada educators for over 120 years in opposition to AB 241. Maybe not the most enviable position today, but speaking on behalf of my members who have some concerns. Certainly not a concern about aiming higher or setting higher expectations. With that said, grounded in the reality of some difficult conditions right now. Basically, this bill largely would just track students into an additional year of math, an additional year of science, an additional year of social studies. While it wouldn't take away electives, it would take away some flex credits, which where students have some choice. Among my members, there's a concern around student attendance currently, and students not being motivated to attend, not being interested in certain course offerings. And if you look at the overall proficiency rates in subjects like math and science, they're as low as around 20% for Nevada high schoolers. So basically requiring these additional math and science classes with students who are struggling. On one hand, perhaps you could argue that that additional year might be needed. On the other hand, it very well could discourage students. We'd also like to point out, based on the previous conversation today, the severe educator shortage in Nevada. It's even worse when you talk about math and science teachers. So requiring these classes of students, while we can't fill the classrooms that we have with qualified teachers, we are very concerned that that is a recipe for not success and setting high expectations and then not having the resources or the tools or giving those students what they need when they enter high school, what they need to meet those high expectations. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And quick question for you. The second part of your statement, I probably can't address, but the teacher shortage, the science and all that stuff, I get that. But the first part, when you're talking about, I think this is an opt-out. So one of the provisions of the bill is you're opting everybody in automatically. So to take care of the question you had, and that is that some students don't want that extra year of science or math or whatever it might be. They can still opt out. Is that's my understanding? Is that the way you understand the bill as well?
Yes.
Would that take care of the problem then?
I think perhaps what I'd have to go back to my team and
Chris
talk
Daly, right? Yeah.
Specifics. So Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association. I think if you had an opt one way or the other, perhaps that would take care of our concerns. But I think switching from opt-in to opt-out and opt-out to opt-in, we think is probably the wrong direction.
Thank you very much. Anybody else in opposition? BPS, let's go to the phones and see if anybody else is in opposition.
To testify in opposition of AB 241, press star 9 to take your place in the queue.
Hi, my name is Alexia Rivera Perez. I am a student at Nevada State College, and I am in full support of Erica Mosca's bill, AB 245, and I would like to commend her for creating this amazing opportunity for our students. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and put you in support instead of opposition. Is anybody else, BPS, on the line for opposition?
Chair, there are no calls to testify.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and move on to neutral then. Is there anybody in Carson City in the neutral? Anybody online?
Chair, there are no callers which should testify in neutral at this time.
Thank you very much. Assemblywoman, if you'd like to make any final comments?
Thank you, Mr. Honorable Chair. I just wanted to thank this committee for hearing this bill. I also wanted to thank all the teachers out there. I know all that they do. And so for me, in one generation, my dad grew up without indoor plumbing, and then I was able to earn a master's degree from Harvard and be the first Filipina in this body. And I think it's just really important that we ensure all of our young people have access, but then they can also opt out if they don't want to. I think that this will really ensure that for the students who want to and just may not be in the right circumstances, that they have a chance to. So thank you for considering.
Thank you very much. And we'll go ahead and close the hearing on Assembly Bill 241, and we will open up the hearing on Assembly Bill 282, and we'll invite, not 282, 182, and we'll invite Assemblywoman Miller up to the table. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you so much. I've been trying to think of a synonym that hasn't been used yet today for your holy chairmanship.
I was going to give you one, but that's good
please,
enough.
Please, okay.
No, that's good.
But it makes me even appreciate even more so having the opportunity to talk to you about this bill briefly earlier this morning. So thank you for that. With that, and hello to Chair Lang and everyone else on the committee. Good to see Asher back. And then I see that Ms. Sturm has a new last name that's been attached that I didn't hear about, so I'll have to ask you about that off the record later as well. With that, again, I'm Assemblywoman Brittany Miller, representing Assembly District 5 in Clark County, and I'm here today to present to you Assembly Bill 182, which revises provisions governing educational personnel. The bill before you today largely seeks to cement existing requirements in the Nevada Administrative Code into statute. I believe that we can all agree, and even discussions today of how important teachers are and how important it is to make sure that we attract and retain the most qualified, well-trained teachers possible. What AB 182 seeks to do is literally just take statutory language that's in the NAC and move it into the NRS regarding the licensing of teachers. So in Section 2 of the bill, it states that a person must hold a bachelor's degree in order to obtain certain licenses for K through 12 teachers and other educational personnel. Now, I know that, again, what people are thinking is we already require a college degree, a bachelor's degree, in order to be a teacher. But again, that's just currently in the NAC. It's not in the NRS, so this would make it law. It further explains that the Superintendent of Public Instruction of the Department of Education may issue an endorsement or license to a person to serve as a substitute teacher if that person meets certain other requirements according to the Commission on Professional Standards, who are tasked with making those recommendations. Now, I know somehow the narrative around this bill got twisted, and there is the assumption, and I will reiterate this throughout the hearing, this bill does not seek to change the requirements of a substitute teacher or any of our additional special licenses that would include CTE or B&I licenses. And first, there is a difference between license, and this was an example that I just realized I called Mr. Killian by his first name. I apologize for that. And through working with Mr. Killian on the assembly side, I discovered that part of it is just the different lingo that we use between what the Department of Ed uses and what educators use and what's actually written into NAC. So with that, there is a difference between a teaching license with a CTE and a special license with a business and industry endorsement. So basically, there's a license. You can get a license as a K through 12 teacher, and you can get a special license. Special license is what we would see for substitute license. we would see for a business and industry license, and we'd even see, and then of course there's, or I should say, CTE and B&I would be endorsements on top of a special license. So it could be a K through 12 teaching license, a special license. Any type of license can receive additional endorsements. So an endorsement is a specified category that goes onto your license. For instance, I have a teaching license with an elementary school endorsement. Others may have added endorsements for special education, for GATE, for CTE, for English language learners, and so on. Nevada also grants what we call a business and industry license. That's a B&I license. And that endorsement enables people from business and industry to come and teach specialized classes in arts, technical trades, or specific trades. So if you go online and look, there's almost 40 different categories, and they range everything from dance to cosmetology, culinary arts, welding, plumbing, and so on, even law enforcement, dental science, carpentry, automotive, etc. The business and industry license is a valued license where experienced, skilled trade professionals can bring their expertise from the real world into our schools. Simply put, the only person who can teach automotive or mechanics is a mechanic. The only person who can teach welding is a welder. There are specific requirements that these individuals must complete for their B&I endorsement as outlined in the NAC. Again, this bill does not seek to make any changes to those who hold a B&I endorsement. It only confirms that a person with a special license with a B&I endorsement can only teach in that specified field of that endorsement. So if you're brought into the school as a welder to teach welding, you teach welding. You don't end up teaching science or math or anything else. This bill is not, again, changing or requiring a bachelor degree for those individuals, just like it's not changing or requiring a bachelor degree for the most common special license with the endorsement, which is our substitute teachers. This was addressed on the assembly side. It was amended in to exclude the holder of a special license, again, those with the B&I endorsement, CTE endorsements, or substitute teachers from this requirement. The intent of the bill is to establish a law to hold that at least a bachelor's degree is required for persons receiving what we commonly refer to as a teaching license, but to exempt this requirement for those with a special license. Section 4 of the bill concerns the regulations adopted by the Commission on Professional Standards in Education concerning licenses, adding that a person obtain a bachelor's degree before participating in a program for an alternate route to licensure. Also, this is also current practice, which is also currently in the NAC. Section 5 of the bill adds that a license to serve as a substitute teacher, it adds that to the special kinds of licenses for other educational professionals, which include nurses, counselors, and psychologists. Right now, those individuals who do substitute teach, they have what's called a substitute's license. So in closing, I do urge the support of AB 182. Overall, this measure seeks to create clarity and longevity in including these requirements and changes to licensure in statute. Nevada has an opportunity to first acknowledge and respect the time and effort and money our teachers have put into earning their degrees. In more cases than not, our teachers have earned multiple graduate degrees and even PhDs. It demonstrates that we appreciate these professionals and do not accept the notion that those who can't teach or anyone can teach. Teaching is a very skilled art. It is a very specialized skill in art. But before the extensive and continual training required for teachers, it first begins with our own academic achievement and accomplishments. An apprenticeship electrician learns from a journeyman electrician. They do not learn from a handyman. Secondly, it sends the message to our parents that we do expect and strive to have the most qualified professionals teaching their children. Parents want to have confidence in the ability of those teaching their children. It also sets an example for our students. We are demonstrating that we're not expecting students to go through a journey or go through a path or go through requirements that we ourselves haven't achieved. We also are able to help students as they maneuver and focus through their own academic journey and world of academics. Lastly, in a time when many states are actually reducing the requirements for teachers and ARLs, Nevada has the ability to demonstrate to the rest of the country that we know that the way to build a pipeline is to restore the profession, and that starts with respecting and retaining our current workforce. Not that we rely on just anyone, because if we just get anyone, we get just anyone results. But that we rely on an actual educated licensed workforce. What would be interesting is if we compared, and I know that's been said already today, and it's been said probably every day you've met this session, if not last session, the multiple sessions. But again, when we're talking about the teaching shortage, what would be interesting is if we actually compared the numbers of licensed individuals in the state compared to those individuals that are actually working as teachers today in the state. Furthermore, as we seek to diversify our economy and bring more business and jobs into the state, imagine the impression that we give if we do not require our teachers to have at least the minimum of a bachelor degree. I know my first year teaching 12 years ago, I got yelled at by a parent because they said, "Where did you come from? And you just got here and you don't even have to have a college degree." And I gasped at that thought, because it was the most unheard of thing I'd ever heard of, a teacher not having a college degree. And then when I actually told her the degrees that I had, she didn't believe me. She said, "I know this is Nevada, and you don't even have to have a college degree to teach." Now, that was 12 years ago. And so imagine with that narrative, especially compared to other states and what they're doing right now. Again, you wonder, why would we move it from the NAC to the NRS? Is because right now, because it's just a regulation, the commission could literally decide at any time, especially seeing the teaching shortage, they could just reduce or waive those requirements. But again, what we have to think of is the impact it would have on students, the morale of our existing workforce, our parents, and of course, any prospective businesses interested in coming to Nevada. With that, I thank you for considering Assembly Bill 182, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Committee? No questions? Oh, wait a second. We have one right here from Senator Doñate.
Thank you so much, Honorary Chair. I had a question regarding the bill provisions that dealt with teachers that have been given the special endorsement for CTE. So just a clarification. I know that in the language it says public, or teachers that are in public schools. Was there a rationale? Does that include charter schools as well, or what was the rationale for just including that?
Yes, when it's stated typically in language that it would include public schools, that does include charter schools. Remember, there is a difference of the amount of licensed teachers that charter schools are required to have. But for this case, yes, it would include charter schools. And also that CTE endorsement, what's interesting about that is it could be achieved for a typical K through 12 teacher could have it, or it could be a special license. So either or, because again, of it being more of the career and technical nature, it could fall into that business and industry, more skilled trade field. Oh, this is Brittany Miller for the record.
All right. Thank you very much, Assemblywoman. Any other questions down? All right. Looks like it's up to you, Senator Buck.
Thank you, Chair Hammond. So there's a critical shortage of teachers and of substitutes, and I know that Mr. Daly, the voice of Nevada educators, just said, to quote, "We already don't have enough math and science teachers." And so I'm just wondering what this bill is going to do, because I know in being a building principal, having to juggle and try and find breathing people to go in and cover a class if subs don't show up, and especially toward the end of the year, when especially Fridays and Mondays toward the end of the year, there is a lack of substitutes. So you end up as an administrator going in and covering classes too. I just wondered, how is this bill fixing that? Because that, to me, where are you going to get these teachers?
Brittany Miller for the record. You know, Senator Buck, I know that it's been said before that we all base our education, how we view education today based on our own experiences. And I had an amazing education and an amazing experience. And until moving to Nevada, I could never imagine that any breathing person was enough. It's not enough for our kids. It's not enough for our professionals. It's not enough to be who we are as Nevadans. And I think we need to move away from, we keep going at this teacher shortage as we're running downhill. So we don't have enough, we can't do it, no one, so we'll just keep lowering standards, lowering standards, lowering standards. Instead, why don't we work at achieving and improving the profession? Again, let's look at the number of how many people do we actually have licensed in this state compared to how many are actually teaching. What I can tell you is talk to the teachers that are in the buildings right now. And I know charter schools are full of a mix, more so, of licensed and unlicensed and educated and uneducated and full-time subs making full-time salaries compared to experienced teachers. And I know there's also a lot of Clark County teachers, and I shouldn't just say Clark, I should say, I imagine it would be the same throughout the state, where teachers who were in the public schools are now in the charter schools. But what I know is how does that, with everything that teachers are going through right now, what is the morale when you're holding multiple graduate degrees and someone doesn't even have a college degree and the state is telling you that it's okay, we view you the same? We're the only profession that doesn't have different categories when it comes to professions. If police officers were in here, there's a difference between an officer, a detective, a sergeant, a lieutenant, a captain, a chief. Same with firefighters. Same with even nurses. An RN is an RN. They are different than an LPN. They are different than a GN. They are different than a CSN. And so here with our teachers, again, I've said why we need this for our businesses, why we need this to keep up the morale of our teachers, why we need to continue trust with our parents, why our students deserve the best. I guess the question is, I'm not looking at it from how does this solve the teacher shortage problem? I didn't say that was the solution. I'm looking at it from why is this acceptable and why don't we believe that our kids deserve the best?
Just a quick follow-up. So, like, for example, you may have a pilot who actually teaches aviation, STEM classes, math, and science would be better than, you're right, just a random substitute teacher that maybe doesn't have a strength in math. Anyway, just a comment. I really struggle with this bill.
And Senator, to that, I would also add, there's different scenarios when it comes to that pilot. So obviously that pilot's already strong in math and science. And in some cases, and I know what I've seen in the Clark County schools, where elective classes can be offered. That's how many of the robotic programs were actually offered. So it was offered to students who are already strong in math and science. So as an elective, I'm talking at the junior high, middle school level, right? So it could count as one of their math credits. Debate can sometimes count as one of your English credits. But I also don't ever want us to fall into that trap that anyone can teach. And so what I remind folks is even that pilot, every single one of us that went to college have had experience in a math class with people that we looked at and would say, they are genius, but they couldn't teach a lick. So even your own professional or own personal academic ability or knowledge doesn't mean you can teach, because some of those college math professors were indeed genius. They just didn't have the skill or the art to communicate that down to everyone else in the classroom. So I'm not going to say, oh, they're a NASA, astronaut. They may be, and maybe some of them have the ability to communicate that information, but just by that profession or title doesn't mean you do. So I want us to be very careful with that.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Senator Titus.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for your advocacy for your profession and for Nevada students, for sure. Section 4, number 6. It says require a person to obtain a baccalaureate degree before participating in a program for an alternate route to licensure. So if they're taking extra credits that would give them the baccalaureate degree, they couldn't do that at the same time they're doing this alternate route? I mean, so you're suggesting you take, I mean, and I'm not sure what that route is, if you have to take some teaching courses that you would get a credit for. So they couldn't apply to finishing your baccalaureate degree if you're just a couple credits off and all of those things. You'd have to actually spend whatever time. It couldn't happen at the same time. Why that particular number 6?
Brittany Miller for the record. The alternate route, or the ARL as we just call it because it's easier to say, was originally designed for college graduates because otherwise a person pursuing a degree would have and could have majored in education. What it was for those individuals who had already obtained a degree and who did not major in education, but then decided to later go into education. And remember, those people also have a choice to go back into a full program. I'm someone, I had already had multiple degrees before I became a teacher. I did not take an ARL because that's more of like a training and an apprenticeship. I did a full another degree and teaching license in student teaching and did the complete path. But again, ARL is the alternate route was for those who did not major in education, not as a quicker way to get to a degree.
All right, thank you. Follow up, another question, sir. So in rural areas, we may not have the college degrees and we may need a substitute at the last minute and are very short with that. So I have some concerns about the narrowness of this, in that certainly we want the best education, certainly we want folks to be in the classroom, but if there's no other body, sometimes a pulse is better than none. And I don't mean that for long-term subs, and I respect the process that teachers go through, and certainly grandkids and education systems in 5 different counties in the state. I don't want easy access to be a teacher, but at the same time, sometimes to put into statute that you have to be this or you can't be there, I'm concerned that it really does narrow sometimes the access and might do more harm than the intended reason for this bill. Again, I certainly, long-term subs and all of those things I've heard throughout this committee hearings, I think needs to be dealt with, but I worry that this particular bill may decrease what we need to have, and that's certainly we have a lack of everything.
And Senator, I just want to reiterate, this doesn't attempt to change the qualifications for subs of any type, for substitute teachers of any type, long-term or otherwise.
Okay. Senator Neal, for one question? Just one.
I don't know what to call you now, but
I'm sure it'll come to you.
Yeah, I'm almost positive.
Chair du jour.
Yeah, let's go with that. Let's go with that. So I just wanted to follow up on Senator Titus's questions. So just to be clear, so this is not going to impede creating a teacher pipeline, which is what we have been engaged in trying to figure out the different pathways that folks can get into the teaching profession.
The pathway I'm familiar with is the one that we passed, Brittany Miller for the record, last session, for instance, for support staff to have an expedited way through student teaching. But again, the license comes from the state. So before, whatever the pathway is, before you can obtain that actual license from the state, you have to, according to this bill, you would have to have a college degree, a bachelor's, yes. Now, keep in mind, even when you're going through student teaching, they were requiring substitute license to do student teaching. So that's still a different license. But yes, in order to be a fully licensed teacher, you will need a college degree, regardless of your path or alternate route or process.
Thank you very much. I don't see any further questions. So, Assemblywoman, if you want to step back for a second, we'll take testimony in support of your bill. Anybody in support of AB 182, please approach. That's you right there. There you go. All right, begin.
Hi, Chairman Hammond. And for the record, as you know, I do usually wear my tie. I apologize today. It's been great having you chair this committee today. Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Kalen Evans, and I am the president of the Washoe Education Association, and we represent the certified professionals in the Washoe County School District. I appreciate the opportunity to address you all today. All of you are fully aware of the massive teacher shortage we are facing in the state. I also know that lawmakers on both sides of the aisle believe that addressing this issue is of critical importance. We have to go about addressing this crisis by providing competitive wages, better working conditions, and treating them like professionals, and making sure that we remove unnecessary barriers that prevent educators from staying in the profession. But what we cannot do is lower the bar for what it means to become a teacher. That's why I'm here speaking in support of AB 182. All stakeholders in our state should want the highest quality professionals supporting the students in our community. Removing barriers is one thing, but continuing to lower the standards to become a teacher is something completely different. We don't treat other professions in the same manner that we treat teaching. Would we ever think of allowing any person who applies as a nurse, for example, to be hired without the proper training and qualifications? What about a pilot or an engineer? We wouldn't allow that because doing so could severely impact people's lives. Yet we're okay allowing people who are not trained and qualified in teaching to become teachers, as if the impact, both positively or negatively, that a teacher has on a student isn't profound. If we continue to lower the bar, we will not only see the quality of instruction diminish, but the teacher turnover rate will continue to rise. We need to maintain a high quality standard for our profession and address the teacher shortage by empowering our current educators. We've got a significant amount of educators in our communities. They've just left the profession for livable wages and more respect for them as a professional. The idea that we should allow any worn body covering our classes and teaching our students truly diminishes how we view the importance of education in the teaching profession. Instead of addressing the systemic issues that have led us to this massive teaching shortage, I'm going to finish up. The way we get teachers in the classroom is to treat them like professionals. Thank you.
Mr. Evans, thank you very much. And you do get more time if you wear a tie and you wear a jacket. I think our committee manager might actually stock them 40 long. 42 long. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorary Chair and members of the committee. Kanani Espinoza on behalf of UNLV and Nevada State College. I will keep it brief. We are in support of Assembly Bill 182. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association, in support of AB 182. Teachers should be profession ready on their first day of responsibility for their students. This means teacher candidates must demonstrate the skills and knowledge needed for effective classroom practice. Candidates who are placed in classrooms and expected to learn how to teach on the job are not profession ready. All persons entering the teaching profession must have had enough opportunities to witness, implement, and reflect on quality teaching and learning. They also need to have foundational basis for this work. For most teachers, that preparation includes 4 years of undergraduate education, providing a broad liberal arts education, creating a firm foundation of teaching knowledge and experience. AB 182 helps ensure the professionalism of teaching, respecting educators who have completed years of schooling and training, building parent and community confidence in our teachers and schools, and making sure the most qualified individuals are in front of our students. We believe strengthening the teaching profession will work to actually reduce the number of teacher vacancies over time, as disrespect, nearly as much as low pay, has been cited as the major factor in a majority of educator departures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else in support of AB 182 here? BPS, can we go to the phone lines and see if there's anybody in support?
To testify in support of AB 182, press star 9 to take your place in the queue.
Good evening, Chair and Committee. This is Dora Martinez representing the Nevada Disability Peer Action Coalition. We would like to commend the beautiful, brilliant, bright Madam Assemblywoman Miller for bringing this bill and sponsoring it. we know a lot of people who have children in K-12 who are receiving IEPs, and some of the teachers, when they're not qualified, they're high school grad and they become teachers and they go to that profession, they are burned out. So we thank her for lifting the bar and creating standard. Thank you so much and have a great evening.
Thank you very much. Next caller, please.
Hello, this is Tamika Henry for the record, and I am in favor of this bill. Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Miller, and thank you all.
Thank you very much. Next caller, please.
Yeah, there are no more calls.
Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and go into opposition. Is there anybody here in opposition to AB 182? How about on the phone lines, BPS? Is there anybody in opposition on the phones?
The public line is open and work, but there are no calls wishing to testify in opposition at this time.
Very well. Thank you very much. Let's go to neutral testimony. Anybody in neutral? How about on the phones? BPS, anybody in neutral?
Yeah, there are no calls wishing to testify neutral at this time.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Assemblywoman, last thoughts, comments?
Thank you so much. I just want to, again, thank you for hearing this bill, but I just really want us to all think and reflect, how did we get here? How did we get to a time and a place where we were actually arguing or pushing back or considering whether or not our K through teachers need a college degree themselves? And with that, I just ask you to support the Assembly bill.
Thank you very much. And we'll go ahead and close out the hearing on AB 182 and open it up for public comment. No good news minutes, no nothing. Mr. Satuki, you can't sit in the back. You can't say anything. Public comment, yes, all right. There's no public comment. We'll go ahead then, and we will gavel out. This meeting is adjourned.